Awesome. For the record, my name is Gabriela Coleta Zapata, Counselor for District 1, and I am the Chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Government Operations. Today is December 2nd, 2024. In accordance with Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom. This hearing is also being recorded. It is live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, FiOS Channel 964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. Individuals will be called on in the order in which they signed up and will have 2 minutes to testify. If you wish to sign up for public testimony and have not done so, please email our Central Staff Liaison, Megan Corugetto, oh my gosh, Megan, I'm so sorry if I butchered that, at meagan.corugedo@boston.gov for the Zoom link, and your name will be added to the list. Today's hearing is on Docket 1200, an ordinance to establish RISE, Reshaping Inequities through Systematic Empowerment. These matters were sponsored by Councilors Brian Worrell, Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, and Julia Mejia. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues in order of arrival: Councilor Flynn, Council President Louis Jen, Councilor Fitzgerald, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Murphy. Just checking to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, and with that, I will go to the lead sponsors first for opening statement, and then we'll pass it over to the administration for their presentation. Councilor Worrell, you now have the Zoom.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chair Coleta Zapata, for hosting this hearing. The strides we are making toward creating a level playing field are under attack. Across the nation, the very idea of ensuring opportunity and safety for all is being politicized and diluted. Honest conversations about our nation's history are being shut down and banned. This makes it more important than ever for us as a city to stand firm and reaffirm our commitment to equity. As Bostonians, we have long fought and cherished the diversity that defines our city. Confronting our history to build a better future is not just a tagline, but the hallmark of our success. You can see it in our world-class education systems and institutions, our capital projects launching across our city, and the way we have innovated long-standing processes to invite more people to the table, from city contracts to our public safety ranks. Part of our story is not just that success, but the devastating impact of the policies that created inequities where we as a city continue to fall short. It lives in the data from our public schools, home ownership rates, and health statistics, where the consequences of these policies show themselves in the stark disparities that remain. And we are confronted by the gravity of it when we see neighbors struggling to stay and thrive in the city they love, or when we hear fellow Bostonians lose faith in their government's ability to make their lives better. This work must be at the heart of how we govern and lead, not just because it's a moral imperative, but because it's critical to our success moving forward. The RISE Ordinance is not just an approach to governing, it's a blueprint for economic growth. It's about embedding equity into every decision we make, every ordinance we pass, and every dollar we spend. It's about creating space for community voices to be heard and ensuring those voices guide our policies. And it's about holding ourselves accountable for the outcomes of our decisions, so we're not repeating the mistakes of the past. We've already seen the power of equity when we measure and act intentionally. In 2024, thanks to this council and to our colleagues at the State House, we passed a long overdue liquor license equity policy that finally gave underserved neighborhoods the opportunity to attract thriving businesses. Space grants, things that we love, have brought new opportunities to entrepreneurs and communities that have been overlooked for years. We applied equity-focused reporting to city contracts. We established the Sheltered Market Program and increased opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses. These successes show us what's possible when equity is embedded in governance. But we must go further. The RISE Ordinance takes our equity commitments and turns them into measurable, accountable policies. At the council level, we will establish a council committee on equity as a permanent part of our central staff structure, ensuring every ordinance, budget, and decision is reviewed through an equity lens. The intention is to have this committee work closely with the Mayor's Office of Equity and Inclusion to develop citywide standards and ensure consistent reporting and accountability. Within the administration, the ordinance will strengthen the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet, giving it tools to track metrics, create training programs for city leaders, and implement standardized equity analysis across all departments. It also establishes equity toolkits, so departments can measure the impact of these policies and programs on historically marginalized communities. 4 years ago, we declared racism a public health crisis in Boston. The RISE Ordinance builds on that foundation, taking the principles we committed to in 2020 and putting them into practice in ways that will shape our city for generations. I want to thank everyone who helped and contributed to this ordinance and this critical work, from the administration, Mariangeli Solis Severa, Ann Lee, Santi Garces, to our advocates, Kathy Abisa from Race Forward, Pace McConkey Jr. from Peace Institute, the legendary Professor Tez Landsmark from Northeastern University, Brian McClure, who worked on the initial policy implemented in DC, and other partners not present with us as panelists today, who have been instrumental in shaping this policy. Shout out to Alyssa Benfew Ramos and Jimmy from BECMA, Dr. Makiba McCary from NCF, Rasan Hall from the Urban League, Dr. Abram Kennedy from Boston University, and Jeff from Kingdom of Kings. The collaboration had brought us to this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. Councilor Mejia.
Hi, yes, good afternoon. Ethan is in my office. We got some technical issues, so I'm not going to be on camera, but can you hear me? Can you confirm you can hear me?
We can't hear you.
Okay, great. So first of all, I want to thank the lead sponsor, Councilor Worrell, for leading this effort. I am super excited to discuss today the ordinance to establish RISE, Reshaping Inequities through Systemic Empowerment. If you know anything about me, you know I'm always passionate about collecting data and ensuring that it reflects our stated priorities, and I'm always looking at what is our return on investments. And each year, I continue to call for a Boston jobs residency policy dashboard to provide real-time transparency and accountability for our workforce development and contracts. Similarly, RISE prioritizes the role of data to drive equity, requiring departments to report on equity activities, progress, and gaps while aligning policies and budgets with measurable outcomes. That is the key into this whole conversation, is those measurable outcomes, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to the ideas of what we were, especially during budget season. This is the kind of intentional systemic work that we need if we're really serious about addressing racism as a public health crisis. At its core, this ordinance represents a commitment to ensuring all Bostonians, regardless of their race, zip code, or income, have equitable access to deterrents of equity, such as affordable housing, culturally relevant food systems, accessible transportation, and high-quality education. As we hear from today's panelists, I look forward to envisioning how we can operationalize these principles in ways that deliver equitable services for our most impacted communities. This is a collaborative effort While I understand that the work is already underway within the administration, I'm excited to create a new institutionalized vision for the city, one that will outlast us all. In the positions that we hold here in the Boston, and as well as on the national forefront. From Council Worrell's team, stressing the importance of why we need this work to be done at the council level based on expressed community needs and for local governance to promote equity, and the importance of creating more space for community engagement. Note that the idea of the creation of a council equity task force to assist in defining parameters for equity analysis, hearings, and community engagement. And we know that RISE emphasizes addressing disparities and deterrence of equity such as health and education and safety. And I'm going to be looking to the administration to talk about how their work can illustrate just that. And I think that it's important as we continue to have these conversations, you know, when most people think about equity, it's usually we default to DEI, and we already know that those programs are under attack nationally, and it's just a matter of time before we start to see that here locally. I think it's really important as we continue to have these conversations that we're looking at both racial equity and class and economic equity, because I think a lot of folks get lost in these conversations. And I just want to note for the record that I always err in the side of understanding that even if you are Black or brown, there are folks who are Black and brown who have far more privilege than other folks. So I think as we're continuing these conversations, I'd like to double in on economic justice and class issues that also need to be uplifted in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I just want to recognize we've been joined by Councilor Weber. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to provide an opening statement. I'm here to listen and to learn. I just want to recognize an outstanding leader in this city, Ted Landsmark, for being here, someone who I have great respect for. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Louis-Jean, Council President Louis-Jean.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just want to thank Councilor Worrell, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Fernandez Anderson for offering this ordinance. I think it's really important, as Councilor Worrell stated, we need to continue to make sure that we are making progress, especially in the national landscape that we find ourselves in. And so that we need to make sure that we are meeting our benchmarks and collecting the data. And so I look forward to this to making sure that we are keeping at the root of what we do, correcting for past harms, and making sure that we are systematically doing the work of equity, right? Correcting for our past harms through intentional policy. And I look at this as intentional policy. And so I really thank my colleagues for putting this forward, and look forward to hearing from the administration and all the advocates, from everyone from Attorney Landsmark to PACE. Shout out to the Peace Institute that's currently in the House here at City Hall for all of the incredible work that they do here in this city to make sure that we, as legislators, are putting at root always the questions of equity. Thank you.
Councilor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nothing is more important than making sure each individual has equal access and opportunity to all things. And so I commend the makers of this ordinance and putting it forward to address those. Of course, with some new oversight, new powers, there are questions I will have about mostly about what it costs, how it works, what teeth it has, and we'll figure that out through the questioning. But happy to go through this today, and thank you for having us, and thank you again to the maker.
Thank you. Councilor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the lead sponsors for gathering us, having this hearing about this important topic. Last week at the Boston Jobs Policy hearing, which is, the biannual check-in, shout out to Councilor Mejia, we have a dashboard now, right? We have data, and the data doesn't look good, right? It's not telling us what we would hope it could tell us, but also what we know is we have policies a lot of them across the city. And if we don't have any power to enforce them, right, we have to make sure that we actually can enforce the policies that we care about. So looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for having a strong panel, which I know I'll learn a lot from and be able to make some good decisions going forward about how do we make sure that we get this right. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Weber.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank Councilors Worrell, Fernandez, Anderson, and Mejia for filing this. 20 years ago, before it was cool in law school, I took a class on critical race theory, and I think that that concept has been mischaracterized in the media. What I remember from it is that it's important to look at our laws, policies, and figure out what impact they're having on different groups of people. And I see this filing as a continuation of that. We should definitely be able to recognize what impacts the city has had in the past through its policies and what impacts our future policies are going to have on every population within the city of Boston. And I just want to thank the filers and look forward to being part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you to my colleagues for their opening remarks. I'm just double checking, just to make sure I didn't miss anyone. Okay, great. Very briefly, I just want to thank the makers, and I appreciate the sponsors' opening remarks that remind us just how important this work is in the context of what is happening at the national level. And in this moment, I just want to say thank you. And I admire, especially given that context, I admire your bravery and in your courage in this moment. So I just want to say thank you for that. I think that this is the clearest example. Our Congresswoman poignantly and frequently says that it is up to us to undo policy harms. And this is doing just that by baking in intentionality around advancing equity and providing those clear standards of what we must adhere to, making sure that we are advancing or addressing the or not addressing, but we are achieving healthy social determinants of health. I think that that's a really important thing to do, and codifying that in law will help us achieve some of those goals. And so I appreciate the maker and the work of him and his staff and the co-sponsors. I do look forward to the conversation. I want to say how excited I am that the council itself has the opportunity within this ordinance, the way it's written, as an institution to lean in and of course, partnership with the administration, but that we could also do this in model behavior. And so I am focused in on some of the opportunities here about how to operationalize that and making sure that we as a body are set up for success and making sure that our central staff is set up for success. So I certainly have some thoughts about that, but I do look forward to the conversation. So without further ado, I will pass it over to the administration panel first to give their presentation. We have Mary Angeles Solis Cervera, Chief of Equity and Inclusion, Santiago Garces, who's the Chief Information Officer, and Trinies Polk, I apologize if I said your name wrong, Director of BPHC's Office of Racial Equity and Community Engagement. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor. Can you just do a quick sound check for me? Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And will I be advancing my own slides, or will somebody from the council side? I'm happy to share my own presentation if that's needed.
Ethan, are you available to screen share and do slide advancement? Ethan, can you hear us? Chief, if you have the ability to share your screen, why don't you go ahead and do that?
I think, yes.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'll be kicking off the presentation, and I do have my colleagues here, Trinies Polk and Santi Garces, who will also be a part of the presentation, and then obviously it's some space for Q&A. But nice to see everybody. It's been a while since I've been in a virtual hearing, but I do like them in person better. But good afternoon. My name is Maria Angeli. I usually hear pronouns, and I'm the Chief of Equity and Inclusion. And thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak publicly about this ordinance that Councilor Worrell and I have been talking about for some time. And while some of the items we'll be touching today are things that you as councilors have already heard about, I'm really happy to come back and share some updates and even some ways in which our work has significantly evolved, especially in the last couple of months, because as you all said, regardless of the national environment we find ourselves in, we remain committed to the work of building a home for everyone here in the city of Boston, and that involves the work that we're doing at the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet as well. But first, just to ground us on a statement that we fleshed out 3 years ago when we first entered as an administration, and it's a very grounding opportunity for us to just understand what we mean when we are talking about the work of equity and inclusion through our municipality. We first acknowledge that we've played a role in causing and perpetuating the inequities in our society. And in order for us to take down these barriers, we must not only reverse, but embed new processes in place. We define equity as ensuring that every community resident has the resources they need. That means that it's action-oriented rather than a goal. And inclusion is about engaging every resident to make sure that we are building a welcoming and supportive city for everyone. Here's sort of I'll be speaking first around the work that I am in charge of in my role as the Chief of Equity and Inclusion with all the different departments under our cabinet. And then I'll also bring us a little bit at a larger scope of how we are involved in a lot of different policies, programs, services that the rest of the administration is focused on. My hope is that you see that through line, that it's not just a siloed work, but rather a collective approach to the work that we're doing. So you all have seen the slide before, but just to remind us that there are 8 different departments plus an equity and inclusion office under the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet. So in the same way that you think of streets having public works and streets, we have 8 of those plus our own office. Anywhere from the 2 newest established offices of Black male advancement and LGBTQ advancement to offices that have been established for decades as well. So Disabilities Commission, Fair Housing, Immigrant Advancement, Language Access, Women's Advancement, and Human Rights. I want to bring up this concept of our team values because you often hear us talk about a home for everyone, a city for everyone. That is what we firmly believe at the core of our work. And in our cabinet, we are focused on being results driven. So we are implementing, evaluating. Councilor Maria, I've heard you, we've talked about like our shared alignment in wanting to make sure that we are results driven and we are evaluating work, that we are accessible, not only accessible to residents, but we are thinking of access during our own processes and services, and that we are building in intentionality throughout different processes, because we understand that this work is not new, but it is experiencing a different level of tension, if you will. And a lot of the work that we have done in the last 3 years in our cabinet has been about internal to understand where we are as a city and to know where we can go. So rather than recreating the wheel, we've spent a lot of time with other departments, having focus groups, interviews, and understanding their work and their needs, because we firmly believe that our colleagues want to do the right thing for every resident in the city of Boston. And while there may be people who are not perfect at this, we work under the assumption and the belief that our colleagues all want to deliver the best services for our residents. So what we do is we work with them to ensure that we can implement the different interventions so that they can do just that for anybody, regardless of the language they speak, the the race they belong to, the group, whatever group they belong to. Our mission, again, as a cabinet first, is to improve life outcomes for the different, for the different communities that you saw on the slide deck earlier. And I want to bring your attention to our theory of change, which has not changed, but it has, we are ready to bring to you different ways in which we have been able to do some of this work of embedding equity into the day-to-day functions of our city. First, we do through a technical assistance program, and that is getting at exactly what you all are talking about today, is what do we do to ensure that all agencies throughout the city are doing work differently to get to everyone. So that's the piece around technical assistance. The other way we do this is through our own targeted intentional programming, right? That's when you hear about the work around mini grants that some of our departments do. That's when you hear the very important work around supporting Indigenous communities. So very targeted intentional planning that we do to get to residents of all backgrounds. And then last but not least, we also focus on coalition building. And this is where I think it's, I have seen a lot of our team and residents really thrive. It's an opportunity that we have for us not only to build trust with residents, but residents to build trust with one another. No one community is a monolith, and so we take the time and we put in the intentionality to build these opportunities of coalition building among different community groups. And that is something that we have seen has been incredibly helpful as well. But I will today, for the sake of the ordinance, the RISE ordinance, I will be focusing on the technical assistance piece. And I'll talk about 3 specific arms of that technical assistance bucket. First is the Equity and Inclusion Academy, which is actually, I am at the library today. Today is the culmination of this year's ENI Academy, and we're doing it through a summit. We had our Chief of Human Services, our Chief of Housing, folks from our planning department, folks from people operations and others gathered today to celebrate a 3-month-long process where over 80 staff members received not only training, because we do not believe that you can train any ism away. We believe that it's our responsibility to bring different groups of people together, to encourage them to learn how to build across lines of difference so that they can do their job better, which is to serve the residents of Boston, right? So it's not about just training people, it's about bringing the resources that they have not had access to, and then applying opportunities for practices so that we can engage in change. But the Academy has just been something that we started last year. We had a pilot of over 40 people. We've now had a series of cohorts doing this incredible work, and I'll make sure to share the report that we have available for you all. But the main thing that I want to share here is that at the end of today, we will have staff that will be certified as City of Boston E&I ambassadors. The intention here is it is not one person's job to do the work of equity and inclusion. It is all of our responsibilities. And so while I may be the Chief of Equity and Inclusion and I get to set the vision and I get to work alongside other parties, et cetera, I need all of our departments to also do this work, which is why we were very intentional about recruitment of different staff members that work in other departments so that they can help us continue to do this work so we're not doing it alone. And I bring this up because I know that this is part of the tension of why we're having this conversation today. It is not only the responsibility of the Equity Cabinet, it's all of our responsibility. Here is just some sessions that we did this particular year. The one that's ending today on the right, we have just basic laying the foundation for the work of equity. We bring in our colleagues from Boston Public Health Commission to do specific training on social determinants of health through a racial equity lens. So this piece of not reinventing the wheel, we have the expertise in-house already. We brought in the experts to bring in their specific curriculum to this academy. We work, our LGBTQ office comes in and does the work, a training as well, immigrant advancement, disabilities, and we also partner with our colleagues at H Strong to bring in a different lens that we also are not experts in, but we need more of our residents to understand. And on the left are some of the goals of the Academy. I won't go too deep into this, but this is sort of how, this is our framework, right? Grounding experiences, providing actual historical context. We have learned a lot that our staff members simply don't know what they don't know. And we put in our capital and our resources to ensure that we are educating our workforce as well, and really creating a space for them to share resources and best practices. Okay. On one that I have spoken to you all less about is the Equity and Inclusion Network, which is an internal infrastructure that will be responsible, is already responsible for embedding equity and inclusion standards throughout the city of Boston. And this is, Councilor Worrell, we've talked about like where a lot of, where there's a lot of alignment here of how do we ensure that these are the people who are working internally to develop plans, develop standards, and ensure that we are actually getting to a place of accountability. This is the infrastructure that we have been working on for last year. We've had to do a lot of back and forth because to us it's really important this is a collective approach and not just one cabinet's responsibilities. But right now we already have 2 cabinets that have signed up, and we've hired our first 2 E&I managers, one in housing, because we know that housing has always been #1 issue, targeting our communities that we represent in the Equity Cabinet, as well as human services. Our residents use BCYF centers. Our residents are using H Strong services. And so we wanted to start where our residents really feel the most need, and just really looking forward to some progress. We've had people on board for about 3 months now, and so looking forward to some potential ways to partner here. And just presenting some models here of how we're thinking about it. One are some full-time positions that already exist, have already been in the budget. We're not requesting new funding. This is just us thinking of ways that we already have the expertise in-house. And there are other ways that we're thinking about this so that perhaps one manager is targeting different departments and cabinets. And these are frameworks and models that we have borrowed and improved from colleagues across the country, St. Paul, such as St. Paul and Denver, and the last city is escaping me, but we've been in touch with those different cities as well to learn how to better serve our residents. And this is a very complex map to show you sort of the vision of what the coordination network would be. There are people that already are embedded in our city infrastructure. You'll hear from Trinise Polk in just a second, but she has been doing the work. She is now a part of this network, and we are leaning into so much of our expertise with the new people that we're also bringing into the work. We've also pulled in from the planning department. We've also pulled in from BPS, and the idea is that they're all sharing best practices to continue to elevate the work and start implementing some of these standards that we're thinking of. And last but not least, this is where I would say we spend a good amount of time formally and informally, which is simply providing consulting support for our colleagues across the aisle, both them coming to us for asking for support and us also identifying disparities and saying, we need to partner with you to do X. And some examples here that I would like to highlight are I participate. And when I say I participate as a chief, I bring this information back to our staff, that it's the 8 departments plus the office, and get their input, and they are in direct contact with residents as well. And then I bring this information back, but I participate in the Planning Advisory Council, the Climate Council, and Safety Net a working group that we have across the city, as well as some situation-specific work that we've done to just provide consultation. And again, it doesn't sit in any one person's responsibility. We tap into the capital that already exists in our department. And with that, I will pause the presentation. But I do want to close out by just sharing that our work has been focused on internal systemic changes and ensuring that our residents are aware of these changes and are aware of these services that perhaps they weren't aware of. And so for me, I'm really looking forward to this conversation to see how we could, right, support one another throughout this process. But just wanted to share, shout out all the incredible work that our staff has already been doing that I just get to talk about today. And Councilor, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you so much, Chief. Did you say that Trinice was also going to give a presentation?
Trinice, can I kick it off to you now?
You got it. I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're welcome. Good afternoon, everyone, and Chair Zapata. Hopefully I did that name justice. And my name is Trinice Polk, and I am the Director of the Office of Racial Equity and Community Engagement for the Boston Public Health Commission. I'm really, really thankful and excited for the opportunity to speak here today on behalf of the Boston Public Health Commission to help inform the Council's important efforts and commitment to the RISE Ordinance. A little bit about my role as the Director of the Office of Racial Equity and Community Engagement. My team and I are essentially responsible for helping to establish and sustain racial and health equity as core principles in BPHC's policies, our operations, and decision-making. And of course, we do not attempt to do this work alone. We do this in partnership with the BPHC leadership team, our colleagues across all departments, and of course, most importantly, with the residents and the communities that we serve. This work aligns and supports the advancement of the BPHC mission, which is to work in partnership with communities to protect and promote the health and well-being of all Boston residents, especially those impacted by racism and structural inequities. And this mission statement was updated last year, 2023, through an all-staff engagement process to more explicitly name racism and the fundamental importance of community engagement. This area of work isn't new to us here at BPHC. We began our racial equity and justice work in the early 2000s, where we identified early, that racial and health inequities exist here in our city. We set equity goals and we trained our staff in the principles of racial equity and social justice. And to help guide our efforts to address the structural causes of health inequities, we established a health equity framework. And this framework essentially asserts that everyone should have access to the resources they need, such as healthy food, affordable housing, public safety, and livable wages, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, age, ability, and geography. So following the Racism as a Public Health Crisis Declaration in June of 2020, BPHC engaged residents and community-based organizations to learn from their perspective what a more inclusive Boston free from racism would look and feel like. And a common theme that came up through that data that we just could not afford to ignore was and is the community's request for city leaders and decision makers to examine racism as a structure and not as a single event or a moment in time. And so in the spirit of that, we have tried our due diligence to make tangible and durable changes in our practices and delivery of service. So since Boston's declaration, we've established BPHC's first community-driven anti-racism policy. And this policy has 13 standards of action for all BPHC offices and departments to take to help advance equity within the organization and essentially across the city of Boston. We have also elevated equity and anti-racism as a key pillar in our strategic plan, our 2024-2027 strategic plan, which reinforces and builds upon our anti-racism policy and equity goals. And I want to build off of what Mara Anjali had been putting in this space in her talking points, we definitely recognize that no one organization can do this work alone. To effectively advance equity requires collaboration across city agencies and connected organizations that are serving our residents. And so that's why, for the second year in a row, as again, Mayor Anjali shared, my team and I were really, really excited to support the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet's Learning Academy to train city leaders. And yes, we are proud to share that we reached, close to 90 staff representing, I think, close to 30 city departments and cabinets that were in attendance. And as she shared during the training, we help folk get a better or clearer understanding of what public health is. We introduced them or reminded them of Boston's journey of racial equity and justice. And we practice using the BPHC equity lens to examine the impacts of decisions that are made within their respective departments. And so I'll share a little bit more about the equity lens that I'm referring to. So it's essentially a decision-making tool to be used by leaders to ensure that racial justice and health equity is centered in all decision-making. The tool guides an analysis through a 5P process, and the 5 Ps include people, place, purpose, power, and process. And so I'll just walk you through a little bit about what that means. So for people, it's important to determine those most impacted by the issue a decision aims to address. For place, it's important to understand the geographic location where that will be most impacted by the decision. And for purpose, here it's important to identify the health disparity or social determinant of health that the decision aims to proactively address. And for power, this is where we want to identify where the decision-making power is held and how it will be shared equitably, especially with those that the decision will impact most. And the final P is process, and that's how will the impact of the planned decision be measured and evaluated. So we can see where we're going in terms of success, and also see where we might be coming up short and might need to dig in a little bit and do some more work. And so for myself, I am extremely proud of the work that we are doing in partnership with the E&I cabinet and other departments and sectors. And we of course recognize that there's much work to be done. There's still a lot of work ahead of us, and BPHC is very eager to engage in ongoing dialogue about the best way to ensure that equity is embedded in all policies. And I thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Chief Garces, did you have a statement that you wanted to provide or a presentation?
Sure. I was just going to share some thoughts as we about the experience that we have working with Chief Mariangeli and with all of our colleagues in City Hall. Can you guys hear me okay? Cool. So again, one of the things that as an administration and as a cabinet that we've been doing is working to build, like thinking about how is it that data can help us inform to make better decisions, but putting it a little bit in context. So over the past couple of years, we've been making investments, thanks in great part to the council, in building practices that had been missing, building user experience research that's inclusive, building data and governance. And partially is because we see that data is not just an end goal. It is part of a practice to continuously try to make things better. And it is challenging because when we describe things with data, we're trying to reflect and model what is actually a very complex reality. Like our residents are experiencing all of the different services and programs in a way that is very integrative, in a way that is complex. And we operate, we have a structure in government that does not always align with the way that, someone's experience of a street, of a public asset, or a public employee, how it fits together with other aspects of their life. So we've been building competency not only in quantitative data, but also in qualitative data, and understanding that people are not just data points, that there's other things that we need to understand behind what's going on. And at the same time, trying to find a balance between our desire to understand inequities based on someone's background, race, ethnicity, gender, income, but also understanding that sometimes when we create mechanisms to try to measure those disparities, we actually create barriers to people for participating and getting access to the services that they need. So we've been engaging, and again, as Mariangeli mentioned, we've been working very closely together. This is not work that happens in isolation, but we've been working with the very communities that experience these gaps and have historically experienced discrimination to try to understand how is it that they would like to be represented in the data, how is it that they would like to be reflected, and putting it in a way that makes it easy and accessible for all of our employees to be able to know how to do the right thing and how to make use of that information to make better decisions. So I just wanted to share a couple of quick examples of ways in which we've been taking action for this. So over the past couple of years, we've put together service design standards and data collection standards around areas of, with an eye towards equity. Foremost, we started with our gender design guidelines and data standards. We issued in the past year a data standard for how we collect data about disabilities and people with disabilities, and we've been working on an updated standard on race and ethnicity. And I'll just use the disability data standard as an example. Again, this is a place where generally when we come into a space, we want to listen and we want to understand. And when we work closely with Commissioner McCosh and with the folks in the disability commissions, and we realized that traditionally our instinct was to try to figure out, like, data is a means of classifying things, or people, we want to put buckets. But when we were in conversation with the community, we learned that the main thing that we needed to learn about people with disabilities was what were the accommodations, what are the things that people need to be, to interact more successfully with the city and with each other. So instead of focusing around what was the nature of disability, the way that we created this data standards was around what are the accommodations that people need. And again, it goes a little bit to what I just said, is when we measure things, sometimes we can also infringe on people's privacy. When we collect information, it also means that the city then has a responsibility to protect the data from people that might want to do harm to the people that we're trying to help. And when we engage in dialogue and when we think about this in a way that's a little bit more flexible and in a way that enables us to engage directly with the community, and as the very community experiences changes in their perspective around what risk is acceptable and how they want to be engaged with, we get, I think, like a better experience. We've been also building, similar to what Equity and Inclusion has been doing, we've been doing a lot of the groundwork, and we'll start at the beginning of next year, convening, again, with a number of people from different departments and agencies, research community of practice, where we're bringing everybody that's doing research, everybody who's trying to understand how is it that their department or agency performs work, and how to improve the work that they do, and trying to bring us all together. So again, knowing that things that impact public health might be the infrastructure, the streets, the housing, that all of the things that we work are tightly interrelated, and we can only learn when we bring kind of this more holistic perspective and bring different pieces of the puzzle together. And again, over the past couple of years, we've also been working on building capacity to learn and think about this as a research activity, knowing it's not only about measuring, but sometimes we need to be judicious and thoughtful about how to create learning opportunities. So not only do we want to learn about disparities between people, but we often want to learn what programs are effective at delivering what benefit. And it means that we need to help departments, and we work together with departments to understand what are the outcomes that we're trying to get, and to be able to understand even how can we design a program to maximize the learning opportunity so that we can have counterfactuals, that we can have things, moments in which we're not only looking at the program, but what happens if the program's not delivered, to try to understand what are the differences in access. So I'll just stop there, but again, it's a measuring and trying to deliver a better government is complex and complicated, is very important. And we've been taking a very deliberate and a very community-based approach. I think that taking the mayor's instruction of working in community, in some sense, like as we try to answer these very complicated questions, that we try to build relationships and a better understanding of one another. So.
Thank you so much, Chief. I do see Mariangela's hand up. Excuse me, Chief, if you'd like to add anything before we transition to our advocates panel.
Mariangela is just fine. I should have said this earlier, but we are about to go kick off a graduation ceremony for our E&I ambassadors. So I'm going to be gone for about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to be back to answer any questions or concerns. So I just want folks to know that that's why I'll be off for a little bit.
Okay, thank you so much for letting us know, and we look forward to seeing you. Have fun at the graduation. Okay, we will transition to our advocates panel. We'll go in the order of Professor Ted Landsmark. Thank you again for being here with us, Kathy, and then Pace.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with this group. I'm a strong advocate of this ordinance. I think it's extraordinarily timely, particularly in relation to everything that's been going on in Washington, which, as among many of us, has created a sense of pessimism about how we move forward with matters of social justice. I would just say from my perspective as a person who's worked for several administrations that the sense of larger pessimism that exists around many of the issues we're trying to deal with here has been in place before. And the city and the administration in particular have risen to overcome that sense of national pessimism through initiatives that have engaged our local populations and businesses in ways that have made strides towards equity, not only more likely, but in fact tangible in a number of respects. And I think of several examples of that that have been successful in the past. I think initially of the efforts that the city undertook through the Safe Neighborhoods and Healthy Boston initiatives, where we encountered a period of time where the city had set a record for the number of murders that had taken place in the city, and where we had census tracts that had infant mortality rates that were higher than those that were found in Bangladesh. And by coming together and being intentional in terms of our planning, we were able to engage communities in a number of small-scale initiatives that led over a period of 2 years to specific accomplishments, which included the lowering of the infant mortality rate to the best in the country, and a period of 2 years that we went through where not a single teenager was killed in the city because of the work that the city agencies did. The second example that comes to mind is the work that took place on the waterfront and in the development of the seaport. Many of us have been critical of aspects of how the seaport was developed, but it has to be remembered that at the point in time when that land became available, the city was in a very dire financial straits. And it took a very intentional look at the potential resources that were available to make the decision to decide to develop that land in ways that would generate huge billions of dollars worth of new tax revenues for the city, and would also do that without displacing anyone. So while at one level, the city could be chastised for not putting, for example, more affordable housing in that area, the revenues that were generated from that effort at that point in time are the revenues that are now paying for school programs and health programs and community outreach programs. So what I'm saying is that we're at a moment in the city's history where a number of external forces are at play that would lead some folks to be very pessimistic about how far we can go in terms of achieving social and racial and economic equity within the city. And I would say that our past successes are a harbinger of what it is we can accomplish now. And in that regard, I'd say that there's several things that we've learned from our past successes. One is that we need to be absolutely inclusive of the residents and businesses in the city who have a stake in the outcomes of the initiatives that we pursue. A second is that we absolutely have to have coordinated action between our city agencies, and then as between city agencies and our nonprofits and our businesses in the city. All of our success, I would say, in the past has come from that kind of coordination. The third thing is that we need to hold ourselves accountable for what our promises have been. We've initiated a number of activities, and very often we look back in 5 years and realize that we haven't held ourselves specifically accountable for whether we actually achieved the promises that we set out for ourselves. And this is an opportunity for us to put in place those kinds of accountability measures. The fourth thing is that we need to be absolutely transparent and open in terms of reporting the data and how we analyze that data. We have access to more data in this city than I think any other small city has in the country. We have more universities and more think tanks and more people doing very hard and good data analysis. And we need to rely upon that and use that effectively. And then finally, I'd say that we always need to keep in mind, quite intentionally, that it's the long-term empowerment of our communities that we're driving towards. Data analysis and shorter-term successes are useful, but unless we're really empowering our neighborhoods and our communities to see their own strengths within themselves and to be able to build on their own capacity, unless we're doing that, I think we've fallen short in terms of the things that city administrators, universities, and our private sector can accomplish. So as a planner who is involved in the development of a number of the plans that have in fact been successful, I look to those as key tools that we can look to as we move forward with this initiative.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your presentation, and thank you for your tireless commitment and decades of unwavering advocacy in the fight for systemic racial equity. So thank you again for being here. Next up, we will go to Kathy Albisa from Race Forward, Government Alliance on Race and Equity.
So it is challenging to think what I could possibly add after all that rich testimony, but I will do my best to share the reflections that I had prepared. But I do want to start by saying Boston is impressive. And just to remind myself and everyone here, Boston is not just any city, right? It's a national and global leader. It's a national and global leader in a number of sectors in higher education and sustainability, in I think I read bioengineering. It's a long list where Boston actually leads. And so what happens in Boston is important to the rest of the country. It might even be important to the rest of the world. So I really want to thank you for both the level of commitment, the thoughtfulness, the engagement, not just on what, but how. The kind of being cognizant of the history, how you got here. It is a pleasure to be part of this conversation, and I just want to thank you all and appreciate so much being able to be here. What I'm going to try to do is to share lessons from around the country. While Boston is exceptional and stands out, you're also not alone. There are over 400 jurisdictions. There's really more, but just in the Government Alliance on Race and Equity alone, which is housed at Race Forward, an organization committed to dismantling racial inequity, dismantling systemic racism, and advancing racial equity through institutions, we house this network. And over 400 jurisdictions have committed to systemic change in their own cities. Their commitment is cross-cutting like yours, because as you have all recognized here, it's not a policy challenge, a program challenge, or a budget challenge. It's all of it, right? It's a systems challenge. And that's why your commitment to data becomes so important, right? You can't change what you can't name, you can't change what you don't know. And the RISE ordinance represents a clear understanding of the systemic nature of the challenge. It also reflects a clear understanding that systemic racism and advancing racial equity is a multifaceted challenge. And data is one facet. But data isn't just the numbers we collect. I think we heard that from some of the staff. It includes the feedback and qualitative information that we gather from our communities that helps us fill in the gaps and connect the numbers to the social and historical dynamics of our city, which have been raised here. For data to be an effective tool, our teams must also be prepared, right? It's the support you give each other. They need an environment where everyone can learn and grow their skills. And because when you're trying to innovate, it's not an if, it's a when. When there are mistakes, we must create a culture of learning from those mistakes. So this ordinance really gives the city an opportunity not just to step up its game on data, but to really think about how to use data in an innovative way, in a community-centered way, in a way where you actually build relationship and coordination across all your agencies. And you can see that in the effort, and I think that is the beauty and awesome ambition that this ordinance presents. Now, while there are racial equity dashboards, I think someone referenced dashboards earlier and other tools across the country, while they've enabled jurisdiction to track the progress, it's really important, the former director of GARE would say, it's really important not to just admire the data, right? It's not enough to collect it. You don't want to sit there and admire how much good data you have and just let those gaps sit there. You have to actually do the capacity building, the organizing, the community relationships that enable jurisdictions to act on the data. And you have to be able to prioritize really strategically, because this is a cycle, right? Each intervention requires all those pieces, all those legs of the table, and then you do another round because you're changing the entire system. So as you think about this next ambitious step forward, think about the relationship to data to all these other pieces, which I think some of your staff was trying to sort of highlight and explain in their own way in their day-to-day work. But through this effort, you can create a really powerful integrated strategy. It doesn't seem like I need to ask this question here in this crowd, but sometimes I say, so is the long-term effort worth it? Well, in addition to the fundamental value of justice, which everyone has embraced here, we have seen this work in jurisdiction after jurisdiction after jurisdiction. What does it do? What does racial equity practice and systemic change do? It surfaces hidden problems that otherwise never come to light. It provides a clear method, right? It's important to have a consistent methodology. When you look at the methods that jurisdictions use, it's consistent, it's clear, it's practical. And it improves relationships between government and communities at a moment when we know how important it is to build trust in the public sector as it is being attacked from the highest branches of government in a very unique historical moment. So I'm not, and as has been said here, also not pessimistic about what Boston can do, because Boston sees all these things clearly. It's obvious from this conversation. And Boston is already doing community-driven work and already building trust in the public sector. And as was noted early on, it also increases economic opportunity. You cannot detach addressing racial equity, or you cannot detach ignoring inequity from economic opportunity. We see study after study that shows how much you leave on the table, not only for communities of color, but for the city as a whole, when you allow inequities to sit and fester. And as in my conversations with people in the city, they've all noted, okay, this requires collaboration and accountability, not just symbolic gestures. So how do you go beyond the symbolic? How do you not leave something in a document? Seems to me you already are going beyond the symbolic, but we cannot forget the resources, the capacity building, the coordination, and the time people need to build relationship to move this work forward. We have to give those putting their hands on it all those things. We have to set them up for success. We have to give them a strong strategy with clear goals that are achievable. And we have to let them know that we all know it's a long-term commitment. It's not a today sort of job. It is a generational effort, and Boston is doing it's definitely doing its part, which is why this is an exciting conversation, given the conversations I've been having the last 3 weeks about what's happening at national level. So I thank you. I thank you for what you're doing, and I'll acknowledge that in such a short time it's difficult to give concrete examples, but I'm happy to send a list to anyone's interested. And like the various successes that the various jurisdictions in our network have found in using a racial equity methodology, the ways that it has strengthened systems for everyone, and the ways that it has lifted up and addressed the needs of communities of color who are the most marginalized in our country. So thank you for that, and thank you for your efforts.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We appreciate you being here. Next up, I'll go to Pace, who is the Policy and Advocacy Manager from the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute.
Thank you, Chair Coletta Zapata. I'm thrilled to be here representing the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, which if you do not know, the Peace Institute is a community-based organization that was founded in 1994 after the tragic loss of Louis Brown, who was caught in a fatal crossfire in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And the Peace Institute was formed as an organization that was committed to serving families and communities after the loss of a loved one due to homicide, and ensuring that all families and all communities receive an equitable response in that moment of tragedy. At the time of Lewis's death in 1994, there was this harsh reality, and we still see today, but we've worked on it, that families don't receive an equitable response of resources and support in those moments. And the Peace Institute is committed to work with our municipal leaders, with fellow community organizations and community advocates to ensure that all families, regardless of the circumstance, receive an equitable response in the aftermath of a homicide. So with that, emphasizing equitable response. And the reason why the Peace Institute has been engaged in this conversation around the RISE Ordinance is to ensure that we can, again, reinforce our equitable practices here in the city of Boston, not just within our policymaking, but specifically our budgeting and the way that our city budgets its resources across the community. I'm here representing the Peace Institute, but also other community advocates that have been tirelessly engaged in the municipal policy process here in Boston, specifically our budget process. A lot of conversations happened in this previous budget cycle for the FY25 city's operating budget, showing up with many community organizations and community members and community advocates saying, we want more transparency, we want more voice, we want to be involved. And I see this RISE initiative as a response from this council saying, we would like to create an environment where we can all be more involved in our policymaking here in the city of Boston. In 2021, there was an expansion of the city council's powers to be involved in the budget process. I see the RISE ordinance as a response and next step to that, saying we can do more when we have more data, more transparency, more communication, more collaboration. That's how we can foster a more equitable process within our city. When I think about the purpose of public policy, it's to combat systemic barriers of access of city resources for communities, citizens, or organizations of color in the city of Boston. The Peace Institute is a Black and Brown led and primarily Black and Brown serving organization. So we are committed to working with this body to ensure that we're combating those systems of violence and systemic barriers of access to resources, so that our organization and so many organizations that we work alongside can do our work better. Those barriers show up in many different ways. And I think about this most recent budget process where there were more transparent and more collaborative working sessions where community members could be involved and could view the council deliberate. And recognizing one of the huge wins of those working sessions was that there was actually a lot of consensus. And the Peace Institute's funding was one of those moments of consensus. But there are influences that interrupt that consensus on its way to being voted upon. So I also see this RISE ordinance as a way of strengthening our democratic process in the city of Boston, not just in deliberation and conversation and hearing, but all the way to when it comes down to casting a vote on record. I'm excited to support this RISE ordinance. I know that my colleagues at the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute are also excited to see that the City Council is proposing this way of increasing transparency, increasing trust. Everything that we do at the Peace Institute is rooted in trust. When community members know that they can come to us in trust for support, I know that there is a hope that they can have that same trust in their governing bodies as well. So I commend this group for working on this policy. I was excited to work alongside Councilor Worrell and his staff and members on this council in putting it together and ensuring that community voice is a part of the process. And thrilled to be here today to be a part of the ongoing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Payson, and thank you so much for everything you do at the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. You've been a great partner over the years, so we appreciate you and your advocacy. Okay, we will transition to questions from my colleagues, first starting with the lead sponsor. I do want to recognize we've been joined by Tanya Fernandez-Anderson. I apologize if you had been here for a while. I just didn't want to interrupt folks' testimony. But I will now give the floor over to Councilor Worrell for your questions. I will allow for 6 minutes for each councilor for the questions. And if you see me put my camera on, that means that you have about 30 seconds left. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't see Chief Solis Sabera on the line. Is that correct? Before I dive into the questions. All right. I guess it's for the advocates. Thank you guys again for all your work. Sitting down, having conversations with my team, but also your work nationally, locally, that have shaped creating Boston a better place for all. So my first question is, what are some real world benefits, right, throughout your work you've seen when cities embed, racial, social equity into their operations? And how can Boston ensure, this has been brought up by some of my colleagues, because sometimes, we put language on a piece of paper, but the enforcement side of it is where we struggle with, sometimes making sure that those policies are actually enforced. But that, this racial equity and RISE isn't just well-intentioned, but deliver measurable results.
I mean, I'm happy to start. I don't know who you're
Yeah, it was,
Ask-
anyone can take it, yes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's best to look at it in the concrete examples, right? So, for example, in Chicago, they really committed to racial equity. And so you see a million little examples of improved outcomes that add up. And an example is tree trimming. Now, tree trimming, if you don't trim your trees, you actually have all this property damage, you have all these problems. But in Chicago, it turned out the communities of color were not getting the kind of services they needed around public tree trimming and that sort of thing. Why? Because complaints-based processes don't work as well for communities of color, right? They had a 311 process. They completely reorganized it when they saw that there was more damage done, less services offered in neighborhoods of color, and they reorganized how they did it so that instead of waiting for complaints, they just had a systematic approach going neighborhood by neighborhood. They reduced property damage, they actually found efficiencies, and they were no longer relying on a complaints-based system. There are sort of millions of stories like that, and the important thing about the process is that you look at the root cause. Another great example I love, and you'll have to stop me because I get, excited. But another great example is libraries. When librarians call, they'll say, okay, what do I do? Do I need to make my environment more welcoming? Do I need to, get more diverse staff? And I said, well, actually a group of librarians already did a root cause analysis as to why kids of color weren't coming in. And that led to the movement to ban fines and fees in libraries. Because it turned out that the biggest obstacle was actually the fines and the fees. And now you see that all over the country. And you see not only a rise in kids of color coming into those libraries now because they don't have that systemic barrier that the librarians didn't actually see. They were looking for posters as a solution, right? Because they didn't have a method and a practice. But also low-income white kids started coming in higher numbers. So you see these sort of millions of small and not so small, right, outcomes that lead to improvements in day-to-day life. But some of the examples are more, also more significant. You look at what, I think it was Minneapolis or Portland, instead of giving people tickets for small things, right, as they're driving, they gave them sort of warning warrants, because it turned out that people would have to decide between fixing a taillight, and paying the rent. So then they wouldn't go to court, and you can imagine the spiraling. That 8,000 of those warrants were turned in, and the small issues were corrected, and people's lives were not disrupted. I can give you example after example after example about how you use a method that improves people's daily lives and adds up, right, to closing these gaps and also improving relationships. And that's why I said it's the data is crucial, but how we use it and how we collect it is just as important, right? There's qualitative data, there's community feedback. You want to build a data strategy that actually deepens your relationship between, community and government. So I don't know if those are helpful, but I can certainly send you other examples.
Very helpful, and please feel free to send me any other examples. And I don't know, Professor Landsmark or Pace.
Well, I would just add to that we've learned over time how important it is to express humility in working with community activists and community groups. Very often we bring a level of training in data analysis to our work in a way that can be intimidating and often off-putting to the people that we are purporting to serve. And it's essential that we work with communities in ways where we really are open-minded to hearing what they have to say and how they articulate their needs. When we were working on anti-violence initiatives in a previous administration, one of the first things we had to learn was to shut up and to just listen to what community people had to say about what it was that they thought would solve some of the issues. And by doing that, it turned out that because they were a lot closer to resolving the issues than we were able to make progress that we had not been able to make otherwise. So I think recognizing that there are good examples around the country is important, but it's also important to recognize that there are solutions embedded within our communities.
I just want to, oh, go ahead, Kathy.
No, you go ahead.
I just wanted to add a few things to consider. Thinking about concrete pieces of how would this address all of the work that we do in the community day by day. Thinking about at the Peace Institute, our sole commitment is preventing homicides, and when homicides happen, we respond with equity and with dignity and compassion. We respond to community violence from a public health perspective, addressing those root causes. And although homicide is not exclusively a Black and brown issue, the data suggests that it is clearly disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities, especially in the city of Boston. By responding in racial equity and justice in issues of transportation and housing and in environmental justice and in jobs and education and public health and public safety, all of those ways, that's how we prevent homicides in the city of Boston, is making sure that our city is racially equitable and just in all of those areas. I'm a social worker by trade. I do policy work now, but I've seen time and time again in clients that I've worked with and communities I've worked with, when they come to, when I've worked with them after a moment of tragedy and we figure out what do we do next, it's always those areas. I want to make sure I feel secure in my housing. I want to feel safe with my family and make sure that they're fed. I want to have a job that I feel secure in, and recognizing that there are systems of violence and of systematic racism that inhibit specific people and specific communities from having better access to those things in our city is a very real issue. So just wanted to draw that parallel, because so there may be folks tuning into this hearing being like, why are we talking about homicide when we're talking about racial justice? That's how the issues intersect, right? And we can't address community violence in our city without addressing the racialized violence and institutionalized violence that happens in the city of Boston. And I think that this policy moves us in having those conversations and being more equipped to respond.
Thank you, Pace. And Councilor Coletta, I see that you came off mute, but I know Kathy had something to add. Love to hear, Kathy, what you wanted to add.
Oh, yeah, Kathy always has something to add, so you'll have to forgive me. But, no, I thought maybe it would be, again, you need both the examples, but like, what are the categorical benefits? You were going to have improved skills in your workforce, because this is actually a skill building process. You're going to have improved outcomes towards your stated goals by changing the question from how many and what does it cost to how do you close gaps and who's better off. Like, you're going to have improved material outcomes. And you're going to have improved trust between government and the public, because it is a process that is relationally grounded and politically astute, really, because ultimately it benefits whole neighborhoods and whole cities. And it's important to remember that's why the social determinant approach is actually the perfect frame. When one person is less safe in a neighborhood, when one neighborhood is less safe in a city, we're all a little less safe. Doesn't matter where you are. That's the same with public health. That's the same with when some people are homeless, we're all a little less stable. And so that is the benefit, is that it is a both and. It targets the greatest need to strengthen systems for all.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, if I have time for another question, Chair, I have plenty of questions, but
you have plenty of questions. I know you do, Councilor Worrell. This is your ordinance. I've been very generous with the time. I want to be respectful of other folks.
Absolutely.
I know that we're going to have a second round, so
perfect.
Especially if the administration is able to come back. So I appreciate your patience with that, and thank you everybody for your amazing and thorough answers to these important questions. Next, we'll go to Councilor Flynn and then Louis-Jean, if they are still on the Zoom with us.
Oh, it's not by order. Oh, sorry. I'll wait.
No, you know what, Councilman Mejia, you're right. I apologize. That was, that's an error. So I'll go to the co-sponsors first. So Councilor Mejia and then Councilor Fernandez-Anderson as original co-sponsors. Thank you for flagging that.
Well, thank you. If we're going to go there, then I think that Councilor Anderson is the second co-sponsor, so she could go before me if we want to be incredibly thorough. Otherwise, I'm happy to go now.
Please feel free to go forward, Councilor Mejia.
Okay, great. And I don't like this office computer because my internet is shaky, so I'm going to go off camera. Okay. So I'm curious, and I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists that have been here. I really do appreciate your thought leadership and really helping us get this to where it needs to be. So thank you, Kathy, Ted, and Pace. You know that I'm here for all of it, especially when it comes to racial equity here in the city of Boston. So really happy to have you here, helping to inform these conversations, because we need inside and outside strategies in order for us to really move this work forward. So thank you. So just really quick, since we don't have the administration here, I'm just gonna ask some questions specifically to the community. How can organizations like the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute collaborate with the City Council to ensure that RISE achieves its intended impact? I always talk about intent versus impact, and sometimes what we hope to do, sometimes we fall short. So it would be helpful if, I know I directed it to Pace, but if anyone here on the panel can kind of talk about what that looks like in terms of achieving these goals. The ordinance identifies social determinants of equity, such as transportation and housing, as critical areas for reform. And based on your research, what structural barriers in Boston should we prioritize addressing under RISE? I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are around that. And then what are some of the foreseeable challenges in implementing the provisions of RISE, and how can the city address these challenges proactively? And I guess this goes back to the climate we're in, okay? Everybody's trying to dismantle anything that moves people who have historically been left behind. So how can we get ahead of what are some of the barriers that we might find ourselves having to navigate in the future? And lastly, as the ordinance requires consistent timelines for equity reporting and implementation, what lessons might inform how the city balances thoroughness with the need for timely action? And I say this because recently, and I think it was, I forget who it was here, but we talked about ordinances that we have already that have been passed, and we pat ourselves in the back. Oh, we did this. Well, at least I'll speak for myself. I've done this, established the reparations task force, worked on the Black Men's Commission, did the Fair Chance Act. And what we had to do is take a moment to really reevaluate whether or not the policies we set forth were really meeting the moment. And so that takes humility to actually audit your own work. And it also takes a lot of humility to say, hey, we could have done this differently, and here's what we've learned. So I'm curious, as we continue to have these conversations, what are some of the things that we need to start thinking about now before we, put pen to paper and pass this? What are some of the pitfalls that we may want to consider being mindful of? I guess that will get me to my 6 minutes, y'all, just so you know.
I'm happy to speak to the question, how can community organizations like the Peace Institute work with the City Council to ensure that this policy has life and is effective? I would say that just by expanding general transparency and documentation and reports throughout our democratic process, I think creates more space where a community can intercede and can engage. So one of the things outlined is the reports that would be issued by the mayor, and how her recommendations for budget would have to be documented, and how they would as to how they would address equity and racial equity and justice in the city of Boston. Those are reports that I'm excited to see. And I know that a lot of community organizations and community advocates are excited to see, so that we can better understand how the administration, how this council is operating around these policy making decisions, so that can inform our strategy in holding you accountable. And the more we know, the better we can work collaboratively to hold each other accountable, ensuring that we're more equitable. So that's one way. One of my favorite parts of my role is I see myself as a community organizer that can bring and help community members feel prepared and empowered to engage in our democratic processes. And the more that we know as organizations, we can share that information and interpret that information throughout the community, so that folks can feel empowered to engage. And I think, again, back to our FY25 budget process, and the Peace Institute was able to show up with over 10 survivors of violence to a Ways and Means committee listening session. We were able to come prepared and be engaged in that democratic process because we were given more information about what was happening at City Hall. So, more transparency, more trust will equip us to work more collaboratively to be engaged together in the process.
Thank you.
I would say that that's a very easy question for me to answer. We have more universities and colleges in the greater Boston area per capita than I think any place else in the world. And we have really smart people associated with those universities and colleges who want to learn more about how they can make a difference in cities. And they don't cost anything. When we undertake research with a city councilor or an administrator, a public administrator, we send a team in and they work with the policymakers at no cost and on tight deadlines to do the kind of research that looks at what other cities around the world might be doing to improve health outcomes or to address issues of public safety. And so I would look to the council really to continue to utilize the intellect and talent that is in our presence and is not paying taxes to move forward with initiatives that folks locally might not necessarily think of and see on their own.
The only thing I would add very quickly is, once again, how the data is collected could also either fuel or undermine, right, that work with communities. There's not just data about racial disparities, there are racial equity practices in how data is collected. So it's really important to pay attention to the how, and the community should be, the community that is in question, if it's the data is about them, should be one of the major partners in the how. They should not just be an object or, of the data collection, they should be a subject in the process.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I apologize. It's past 6 minutes. We will have a second round if you have any additional questions. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much to all the panelists. It's been a pleasure listening to you, and really appreciated how comprehensive or dynamic your statements were about racial equity as we know it today, but also the work that you have been committed in doing. I guess, in terms of my questions, Madam Chair, I think reserving my time for further questions, but I guess I'm trying to figure out how we are connecting, the work that is in community already without reinventing the wheel, and figuring out how we can best utilize and I guess this could be a question for anyone who wants to weigh in, how to maximize on a service that already exists in the community. I know that Councilor Worrell and I had talked in depth about this in terms of programs that already exist, like, for example, Somerville, who uses a third-party company with Dr. Marala, who did sort of a post-grad study on racial equity and then went on to opening up her own organization. And then now contracted through Somerville and a few other cities as a third-party agency to actually do some of this metrics or building out rubrics or benchmarks that the city has to meet by a certain time. And I guess, I'm interested in any of the panelists sort of giving us their point of view and how they envision the city working with third-party agencies or community nonprofits or services that are already in existence to build out this sort of more holistic way about approaching this. I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Albissa, who mentioned in terms of how multifaceted this issue is and like where do you even begin? So perhaps, the accountability in terms of transparency and what's, and how Councilor Worrell has laid out here in this ordinance has beautifully laid out in terms of accountability on policies and budget and other types of implementations. But how do we build that partnership with agencies out in the community, and how do we sort of get more in depth in terms of making recommendations for the city in the event that they're not properly, or that we are not properly addressing those needs of racial equity?
I would just note that despite all of the access to research that we have within the city and the consulting that goes on to support community activities, there is not a single repository that I'm aware of anywhere in the city that could be used so that those of us who might undertake new research have any idea of what prior research has been done. I'm part of a very large university, and I know that there's research that's gone on in neighborhoods where I'm doing policy work, where our law school and our nursing program and our criminal justice program have also done research, and that we would all benefit from knowing about that and exchanging data that might be useful. And that's only within one university. I have no idea of what's going on at the hundreds of other universities in the area. And I don't want to make things more difficult for my colleagues, but it might be useful, for example, if the counselors knew or were at least notified of the kind of research that was going on in their neighborhoods, so that we could all leverage what it is we're doing and not continually reinvent the wheel because some other group of graduate students shows up to study the same or a similar set of issues. That might become a part of what the council expects in terms of in lieu contributions to what the city receives from the intellect that exists within our universities.
I agree with you, Professor, that there's a wealth of resources, and I think Councilor Worrell alluded to this in the ordinance as well, in terms of like coordination or even interdepartmental and cross-departmental coordination, and as well with universities using the academia to not necessarily spearhead, but to be partners in this, in already existing and consolidating all of these research into one place. I think here we see Mr. Garces with his hands up, so I'm interested in understanding, I guess, if you could take us to the next level, like what would it take to be able to consolidate all this information? We have Boston Foundation that we know has provided some research. I think Embrace Boston had done a partnership with Boston Foundation as well. James Jennings with the anti-displacement research. And there are several on different levels, housing. We have the Boston Public Health Commission with the Health of Boston. And we have different research, but you're absolutely correct. Where do we begin to quantify where is the status of these things, or our social determinants of health as it pertains to our Black and Brown, but just marginalized communities in Boston. I hear you loud and clear. I appreciate that. Mr. Garces?
Yes, thank you, Councilor. Yeah, I wanted to highlight a couple of efforts, again, recognizing that there's more to be done, but a couple of things that are going on. The first one, internally within the city, again, even we find that different departments or agencies might be interested in some of the same issues, but we, in the past at times, might not have coordinated as well around and one thing that is clear to us is we want to be very respectful of people's time, and when we go and interview them or put a survey, you can get exhausted if you get a lot of surveys from different departments. So we've been building this research coordination council, an internal group of people that do research across different departments and agencies so that we can better understand what studies or what data we might have already and be able to learn better without having to go out and study the same thing multiple times and be efficient in that way. And the second piece is we work closely with the Boston Area Research Initiative, which is a consortium of different academics from different institutions, including the Boston Foundation and the Boston Indicators Network, which has information about these things. So again, there's, to Professor Landsmark's point, there's so many smart people studying Boston who live in Boston, and even people that are outside, that there's just a wealth of information that we could do a better job of coordinating and understanding how to get the most potential. But there are some things that we have been doing over the past several years to try to improve our ability of sharing and collaborating and getting perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Garces. Madam Chair, I know it's my time. I guess just to you, Madam Chair, do you recall what time Chief Cervera was going to return back?
I don't know if she said. I have in my notes that she had a hard stop at 5:15. I believe she left around 3. So okay. I'm hopeful that she could join us. I'm going to direct maybe a member of my staff to reach out via email to see if she'll be joining us. We do have Trinise still on the line, I think, from the BPHC, if there's any questions that folks want to voice to her at this moment. But there will be around 2 for when the chief jumps back on.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn? I think Councillor Flynn left us. Council President Louis-Jean.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists and for everyone for the information that they provided. Pace, I really, of course, think, because I think about what's our bailiwick here, and I think about what you provided, what you said about the budget process, I think was really sort of on point as a way of sort of us being able to measure our commitment to the work of equity, but also bringing people in to do that measurement alongside us, which I think is a really fascinating question. I actually had a question for Mariangeli, for Chief Solis Cervera. I'm not sure if anyone else is able to address this, but she started mentioning that the city is working on having E&I ambassadors. And I was curious if anybody has more context as to what that looks like and what that means. Okay. I take that as a no. Okay. Well, my next question is for Trinise, if she's still available. Thank you for the work that you're doing at the Public Health Commission. I wonder if you could just go into a little bit more detail about how you see the work of the commission as already implementing some of the goals of RISE.
Sure. Hi. Let me get my camera back on. Thank you for the question, and hi again, everyone. So I believe I mentioned or I shared that we implemented our first of its kind community-driven anti-racism policy. And in that policy, there are 13 key standards of action. And I'll be going off memory right now. One that definitely aligns with RISE is we have, right, similarly to the city, we do have a procurement policy expectation. Also in our anti-racism policy, there is an expectation for all departments to practice equitable community engagement. So that's been a reoccurring theme on this call, right? And then you also heard that we just updated our mission statement to reflect that commitment. And so really what that means is to do exactly what's been placed in this space to make sure that we're not making decisions without the community's input. And I want to throw a little nugget in this space. We have a tool that we use to hold us accountable to the practice of community engagement. Because what I think I'm hearing in this space, yes, doing community engagement is important, but what does the accountability look and feel like? And so what we often hear is that, you know, we go into communities and we seek their feedback and we collect the data, but we are not so great at always going back and reporting out, right? And so we have a tool, or what we refer to as an accountability structure as part of our community engagement practice that's referred to as the we asked, you said, we did, and this is what changed. So every department within the organization is required to write a summary of what the engagement looked and felt like and report back out to those that were engaged in the process. So I'm more than happy to share that tool with you guys as well. So I think I mentioned procurement is one of the standards, the practice of community engagement, obviously training, making sure that we're building capacity of our staff, because it's one thing to put things in writing, but it's a whole nother thing to give our colleagues the tools and the resources they need to support implementation. We also have a reimagining of what we're referring to as a health equity in all policies. And I shared a little bit about what that looks and feels like in terms of the lens, right? The 5 Ps. So all decision-making should go through this process or this mindset before you're making final decisions. So again, I'm going off memory. I gave you 4 tangible ones. Budgeting, of course, we have a budgeting equity tool to make sure that we are, when we're developing our budgets, that we're making sure that we are distributing or redistributing our resources where they need to go. So those are some key examples of the alignment between what we're doing at the commission and again, the alignment to the RISE ordinance. So hopefully I answered your question. If I didn't.
No, you did, Shanice. Okay. No, it's good because Chief Solicitor isn't here, but I think about I was thinking, as you were talking, I was comparing it to what it would look like to have people who are like the ENI ambassadors, or is there a possibility, and I hear that from what you're talking about, of embedding it more into sort of like the whole framework of the department. So just an interesting comparison to what's said. Kathy, you talked about how, you know, Boston is really has been on the front lines and ahead of the game on a lot of these issues on racial equity and racial justice. But if I am correct, does DC have a version of this, or are the other cities that are doing something similar to what we're trying to accomplish here?
I also said Boston was not alone.
Okay.
And
sorry, I missed that part, I guess.
No, yeah, no. I mean, Boston has, I mean, the fact that this is a step in a long process says a lot about where Boston has been. But yes, DC has a similar, a similar bill, a similar setup, and there are other jurisdictions to learn from in terms of the data work. That's another thing I'm happy to sort of pull from our members and ask our researcher, like, where are you seeing some like interesting data implementation? Because really that's where the magic and the trick is, in how you implement your commitment to rigorous data, right? And doing it in a way that's community driven and community centered, because researchers can do a great deal of good and they've done a great deal of harm. If you ask the wrong questions, you get the wrong answers. Yeah, happy to pull others for you.
I see that the chair has come back on, means my time is up. And further conversations, I look forward to looking at what implementation has looked like in other cities and to really delve into that to make sure that we learn from the challenges. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
If I could just add a word to what Trinice was saying. In my half
Please.
dozen odd years on the BPDA board, one of my observations is that some city councilors are really good at getting back to their constituents about how constituent power has affected policy in their neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And the councilors who do that, based on my observation, develop a level of longstanding trust with their constituents in a way that seems to exceed that of other councilors. And I think that the council serves a really important role in communicating with constituents about progress that has been made in all of these areas of social justice. And some are really good at it, and others perhaps a little less so.
Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Fitzgerald, if he's still on.
Hey, Chair, how are you? Thank you very much. So a couple questions. Thank you all for all of the presentations, testimony, and statements today. I guess the questions I have is I want to focus on the piece that's sort of for our central staff for the city council, which I believe a lot of this was sort of discussed around, at least in the written hearing itself. Do we know, and for the other departments that have implemented these things, do we know what the cost is around to try and do something like this? If we were to have our central staff become that, I would just like to start there, if anyone has an idea about sort of rough cost to implement this.
I will, since it's a city council question, I will defer to maybe Councilor Worrell if your staff's done any investment projections or anything of that nature for the budget.
Yeah, no, we don't have any analysis yet, but it would be, we've been having conversations on if, one of the liaisons can take on some of this work, or, third party it out, or hire a new position.
Yeah, I guess it's like how many people, all that, like, is it a, who's a group, or who do we hire, how many people, staff, again, just adding to the council, just wondering what if we had numbers around that. Secondly, who do we decide is on this group, or how are the decisions made about who gets put on that sort of looks at it through the equity and inclusion lens? And is there a process for adding those people? I don't know, folks that are on the call now in other departments, is that all just an internal thing, or is there a separate sort of third-party external, equity and inclusion board that overlooks all policies before this stuff is implemented to make sure it's up to snuff? And if so, how are those people chosen?
The way we have it laid out inside of the hearing, it made up of council colleagues as of now, but we are exploring using a third party, which would engage community members to create the framework, which then that framework would then be used for ordinances, investments, et cetera.
Gotcha. I think my only fear around something like this, and it has nothing to do with the result or what we're trying to achieve, right? Ultimate equity inclusion, we want to make sure every person has that opportunity, and no one should be left behind in that. But what I've seen over my years, and Professor Landsmark, maybe you can help me or speak to this, but sometimes we see something like this put together, and then if it doesn't have the proper teeth, or it doesn't have the proper people or lens or oversight, if it's just another layer of oversight, what sometimes can typically happen in government is it becomes more of a deterrent than a helping hand in getting this stuff. I sort of think of when you might put something forward, and if it doesn't pass muster amongst the group, then would a counselor not be able to put forth a hearing notice if something they wanted to put forward, or would it just say, hey, this doesn't reach our levels of equity and inclusion, and therefore you cannot submit it? And
no. So sorry, yeah. So what it would do is just provide an analysis on what was being voted on. So it wouldn't necessarily stop you from introducing a hearing order. However, when something is going to be put up to a vote, there will be an analysis done on, you know, the legislation, the investment, to speak on the impact, right, that it has on marginalized communities here in the city of Boston. So it wouldn't stop anyone. It would just provide another layer of detail and information so that councils and the public have that information to, you know, base their vote on. And the public also has that information as well.
Gotcha. And does this, if we were to do it at the council level, is this something you expect to permeate throughout all departments in the city, and that we want, right? Ultimately, are you thinking this is an overarching all city department sort of initiative?
Yes, yeah. The idea is to embed the same type of framework that Trinice was speaking to over at the Boston Public Health Commission, where they're looking at things through a certain lens, how they have incorporated, the 4 Ps and those 13 standards here in the city of Boston as well. But we will be creating that for, we will hope that the Equity Inclusion Cabinet will be creating that for the city departments.
Gotcha.
Brian,
I see your hand is up.
It's 5 Ps. Just for clarity, Brian, it's 5 Ps. I got you. It's 5
Sorry, 5
Yep.
Ps.
Yep.
Yeah, Kathy, yes.
But very quick, just, I think the questions about implementation are always the most important ones. And there are cities, you'd be surprised, Dallas, you know, of all the states, Texas is actually just done a 40 agency process where they each have a racial equity action plan, and their data game is very strong. So it might be, as you move forward, to talk to cities who have been doing this really cross-cutting work that you all are also doing, just to look for where those lessons have been learned and those landmines, and I'm happy to make those introductions. But it's certainly possible to do it in this cross-cutting way, and it has spectacular results, and Dallas is one example.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Mr. Landsbach, I know you're unmuted. I don't know if you were waiting to say something as well.
No, actually, you answered the question.
I answered your question? What was your question? How did I answer it?
It was a question that was raised about process, and you answered it.
Understood. All right. I'm glad I could be helpful even when I don't know it. Yeah, so again, I guess ultimately with these things, you just don't want it to have it be another layer of bureaucracy, even though it's got great intentions. That's my only concern overall, adding this, especially throughout an entire city, and what the cost might be, and what actual teeth that this policy would have. Creating the report, I feel like a lot of people could make equity. You could, I mean, anything we put forward, we could just say, well, here's how it's equitable, right? And I feel like it's a very gray area in terms of how you could spin it. And does it just become something like, I don't know. I don't want to get too deep down it, but it just seems like I worry that you could just say, yeah, it's just a box we have to check now. And we're not actually concentrating on what is the actual intent of implementing equity and inclusion. And hopefully it doesn't just become, another step in a process for us is my concern. And at what cost? That's all.
Thank you, Councilor Fitzgerald.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you. Trinice, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to answer or address anything that the council has mentioned?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to add in the space that, at BPHC, yes, we've been on this journey for quite some time because it does take time. So we have that experience under our belt. And I want to say that, you know, where we are, right, at BPHC and across the city, you know, in partnership with our brother and sister departments at City Hall, it's a very telling time to really hone in on accountability, as we've said it in this space. And so I want to just mention two things. One, that has worked to my advantage for getting this work done, and that is following the community's lead. And at BPHC, we define community both as internal and external. So those individuals that we are serving and those individuals that we work with, right? Those are my colleagues, but they're the community. And so I don't have any success with any of this work without engaging them. So I go on, I refer to it as like a tour, right? So whenever, you know, data tells us we need to go in a direction that we just need to go in because the data is telling us so, perhaps my department is the one that's doing the visioning, but it is my responsibility to bring that vision across departments within the organization and engage them in the conversation of what it would look and feel like to implement some of the things of which that, right, my team and I have designed in terms or thought of in terms of visioning. And that works in our favor because we get to hear from them what might some of the barriers or the challenges to implementation be. So rather than sit in a bubble and create this at the senior leadership level and then roll it out and say, hey, this is what we're doing. No, that's not going to work, right? So we go to our people internally with an initial idea. What do you think about this? And again, tell us why it will work. Let's start with what's great about it. Tell me what's good first, and then tell me what might not work because of X, Y, and Z. And then that way we can try our best to get ahead of some potential roadblocks, because sometimes it's not because people don't want to do it, it's just because life gets in the way, right? And so we want to be mindful of the things that might get in the way of doing the work. And then also we are in the process, I hope I'm not getting ahead of my BPHC team here, but we are going to be rolling out, a performance management system where we are, again, honing in on accountability, and we've embedded some equity expectations and one's performance. So how are you contributing to the success of our goals around equity? And what does that look and feel like as it relates to your specific role and the work that you're doing? And again, the accountability to equity. So I just wanted to throw that in this space. And I'm more than happy to be a thought partner in terms of process and implementation. If you need some support and some guidance there, you got me.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Trinice.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Fitzgerald. Do we have Councilor Murphy still with us? I think I see her. Councilor Weber.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Thank you for all your testimony. I guess I'd start with Professor Landsmark. If he's trying to get away, we'll let you go. But in terms of the studies and your long history here in Boston, in terms of making equity more of a reality, what areas do you think we should be focusing on? If any, I mean, or is it just everything, or is there, if you had to pick 3 or 4 specific areas, what's your advice to this body?
I think the challenge is to figure out what time frame you're talking about in terms of seeing results. Clearly, we want to focus on education. But you don't get to see the results for that for years, generally long after an elected official has served their term. But I would continue to focus on education and particularly on workforce development in the short term, in part because you can see some of the results of that more immediately than you can see change in the housing market, for example. And it's also the case that you want to work on those areas where there are tangible results that can be seen. You know, the issue of gentrification gets raised a lot, for example, around equity. But, you know, our students' research shows that a lot of the gentrification is being driven by venture capitalists and, you know, commercial real estate owners who aren't anywhere close to Boston. And so you enact certain kinds of things that are intended to have a positive effect on reducing gentrification. But in fact, in some respects, that horse has already left the barn. And so I think you want to think in terms of those areas where you have some real control, and those areas where people can start to see tangible results in the shorter immediate term. When we put together, for example, the Safe Neighborhoods program, we did get to a point within a year and a half, where we went through 2 years without a single teenager in the city being killed. That was a very tangible result that you could point to. But with some of the other things, like changes to the structure of the school committee, you know, that's still being debated. And so you have to look at those things where there are tangible outcomes that can be pointed to. And I think some of them aren't always the most obvious. Some of them may relate to things like access to parks, or the presence of community centers that are open longer hours. Those kinds of things are very important and improve health outcomes, but don't necessarily show up in the short term.
Okay, yeah, I have a follow-up for you, Professor Lansmark, but it just Kathy or Ms. Polk or Pace have anything they want to add? No, it's fine. It's not. Nobody's getting graded.
I mean, I'll always you know, make a reference to, you know, violence prevention and violence response in areas of equity where we can really expand and do more. I always appreciate Councilor Fitzgerald's reference to, you know, we want to keep families in Boston. We want Boston to be a place where families can feel safe and can thrive. And thinking for our work at the Peace Institute, when someone experiences a violent incident, even to the extreme of losing a loved one, that they can feel like not only that they can keep Boston their home, but Boston is where they can heal, and they can have access to community healing and access to all of the resources that would sustain their life here in Boston. And agreeing with Ted that many of those intersectional issues are housing, our education, our parks, our environment, jobs, and so on. Thank you.
I mean, what I will add is I'm not going to add a theme or a specific intervention, because I think what actually seems to work most powerfully is when you ask different communities where their priorities are bubbling up, because there are things that you don't see if you're not, you know, in a community in a day-to-day way. So I think what's really most important is the process to determine the answer to the question that you're asking, and really trying to figure out who are the people who should be helping us, helping you all identify what those initial priorities are. And that should be a very community-driven process, because you will then be addressing something that's high on people's radars, important to them. You may not even know why it's so important to them. It might have been less important to you. And you'll have a lot of buy-in, which leads to the next success and the next success and the next success.
Yeah, I guess I think I have one last question. And I guess for Professor Lansmark, in terms of the community, how do we make sure that we're getting everyone in the community? Do you have any suggestions there? Because sometimes you meet with one community organization and it doesn't, and it looks like representative of the community, and others are not necessarily representative of the community. How do we proceed as counselors? What does the academics or the research say? How to make sure we are doing a decent job of connecting with everyone in the community?
Yeah, what the research shows is that you just have to show up and let people know that you've shown up. And often that means, being in the supermarket or the laundromat when people are there. It means going into the barbershop or the hair salon when people are there. I think we learned a lot from COVID about outreach, because there are a lot of people who were contacted and served well through public outreach that hadn't been utilized to that extent before. And it really comes down to showing up, and not just at the formal community meetings, but elsewhere. We talk about this a lot at school. A lot of people took a lot of risks to make voting possible for people of color, and yet in recent elections, voter participation has been down in a lot of communities of color, including our own, around the country. And so then you start to ask yourself, why did people take those risks if we're not going to participate? And being at those places that incentivize and encourage people even to vote becomes, I think, a significant measure of how we're reaching people around other issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor, and everyone else. Chair, back to you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Weber. We do have Chief Solis Savrera back with us. She's in the waiting room. We want to elevate her as panelist. I think she has joined us. I appreciate you coming back, Chief. I hope the graduation went well. We're gonna dive right back into second round of questioning. I will circle back to the lead sponsor, Councilor Worrell, for his questions. We'll do, I guess, is 4 minutes fine? 4 minutes for this round? I'm gonna say 4 minutes. Cool. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Ms. Polk, and just kind of dovetailing off of what Councilor Weber was talking about in terms of like goals and measurement. Can you talk to us? You said you had equity goals, and Professor Landsmark, talked about, it taking, longer periods of time to reach some of our goals that we're striving for in equity. Can you talk to me about how do you set your goals? Is it yearly? Is it quarterly? And then just can you share some of those goals with us? And then also to Chief Solis Savrera, does the Equity Cabinet have any similar goals that they have that they could share with us as well?
Once you turn it off and on, you gotta be quick and get it. Great question. I will share that our strategic plan, our most recent and up-to-date strategic plan, has anti-racism as one of the priority areas. And so what we've done is, and this was intentional, we lifted up the standards, some of which I mentioned in this space, the 13 standards of the anti-racism policy. We lifted up those standards of practice in our strategic plan. And I believe Mara Anjali said it earlier, or it's been mentioned in this space, to make sure that though BPHC has an office of racial equity and has had this office for quite some time, it's important to communicate that the responsibility does not solely fall on this department, because that's a lot of pressure, right? And there's no way we could be successful in making that happen. And so, again, our goals reflect what the standards that are in our anti-racism policy, that are in our strategic plan. And then also to, just to put in this space, our overarching goal is to increase life expectancy here in the city, right? The data keeps telling us the same story, that Black and Brown people are dying at a much higher rate than our white counterparts. And so that's a huge overarching goal for us, that we are embarking on that journey. And again, hopefully in partnership with you guys and the rest of the city that's serving the residents. So hopefully I answered your question.
Thank you. Yes, and I know that the Health Commission went out to neighborhoods this year to talk about that report and, prioritize, just that, making sure that there's healthier communities and healthier people living longer here in the city of Boston. Chief Solis Severa, don't know if you want to
add. Yeah, to the question of do we have goals or how we set goals? What
are the equity goals, right? And then how
because those are very unique per cabinet. Those are the ones that we are setting together with the equity and the E&I managers that we will be launching very soon. We've started with human services and they're going to be doing internal assessments, and those goals will be implemented in partnership with those specific departments.
All right, Chief Garces, I don't know if you, so there's data collection and creating equity toolkits and reports inside of the ordinance. Do you feel comfortable that you have the resources in order to carry the data collection, tracking, reporting, the toolkits, that process out? I think we lost him. All right. So, guess I'll ask. Did we lose him? I think we did. All right, my other question for Chief Solis Severa is, I know that we've codified a lot of the departments within the equity cabinet. I don't believe we've codified the equity cabinet itself yet. And from what I can remember, there's a lot of the language in codifying those departments comes with reporting, right? Data collection, reporting, equity studies. How does that, can you talk to me about how do you gather all that information, right? From whether it's women's advancement, immigrant advancement, Black male advancement, to then inform these cabinets on, the data that you have in order to make the lives of each of those different departments that they're serving, better.
And you're asking a really important question that is more focused on sort of the organizational development aspect of the work. We've developed multiple moments throughout the day where our departments connect with one another, so that they're sharing information with each other, whether that is our policy staff ingrained in each of the departments, or that is program managers ingrained in each of the departments, so that they're sharing not only best practices, but as we understand intersectionality is also a part of the work, they're speaking with one another. So that's more of sort of like the informal ways that we're doing that. There are reporting structures, from our department heads, of which there are 8 plus cultural affairs and the work of reparations. which those two pieces of work that I just named and the literacy task force are all essentially, codify is not the right word, but they are birthed out of ordinances as well. There are ways that when asked, we come and report, and we can definitely be more proactive around reporting out that, within that infrastructure. But when it comes to the codification of the E&I cabinet as a whole, we don't particularly see a need, because we have, it's vertical, it's horizontal, it's diagonal when it comes to the reporting of information, and it's just a matter of us having tighter structures of coming to you all to report if that is a need.
Thank you, Chief. And I think one thing, just from this hearing, that I've heard is that, the reporting out, especially to, not only to the public, but also to, policymakers such as the city council, to be able to identify, right, whether it's the fines on books that would encourage, more people to come in to the library, right? So I think like sharing out not only to legislators and policymakers is something that, I would definitely encourage, the E&I cabinet to do, but just because of the impact that it can have in the long run on just changing behavior here in the city of Boston. But thank you, Chair, and no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. I'll go to Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm happy to see Chief Solis. Ay, Dios mío, Maria Angeli Solis.
You know my name.
I have to say your full name so it can come out right.
Thank you.
Maria Angeli Solis Rivera. If I try to say it without that, se me olvida.
I love it. Thank you.
So I'm happy that you are here, because you mentioned the literacy task force, and I think most of the things that fall under your cabinet has been under my demise. I'm so sorry for that. But from the Office of Cultural Affairs, the Black Male Advancement, the Literacy Task Force. So I'm really happy to know that, you are here in this conversation as we now work towards working on this particular initiative, because I think it's really important for us as a city to really be more thoughtful about how we do policymaking. And I think that this is where the devil is in the details, right? Like, how do we set you up for success in terms of what data collection looks like? Who are your thought partners in terms of defining what types of questions we are asking, right? Who are the folks that you are going to be collaborating with inside and outside to really develop your metrics, right? Your benchmarks. Here's where we are, here's where we want to be, here's how we're going to get there. And for every single piece of legislation and every budget ask that we put out there, utilizing some sort of framework. So I'm curious, what have you been thinking about, and kind of like, what do you think would be helpful to you in your work without the RISE Act? Like, it's just like without it right now, like what would you say, how have you been managing telling a story about the impact that you've been making before this conversation?
Thank you, Councilor. I would say, so where we are right now, with different departments, we are sitting with cabinets that represent needs that are unique to their specific constituency. So take, for example, you mentioned Black Male Advancement, MOLA, LGBTQ Advancement, Women's Advancement. We're spending time, we're selecting the top 3 needs, right? We'll never get, we're trying to do things differently is what I'm trying to say. Rather than focusing on all the problems, we're having the departments identify the top 2 to 3 needs, and then we are spending time with those departments so that as they're introducing their budgets, they are thinking specifically about these, which, as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of similarities in need. So that is part of the exercise as well. So that when we enter the budget process, we can confidently say, this specific line item request from housing, or this reallocation, or this maintenance budget is going to also have, we're seeking for this to have this specific impact. What we all need to do a better job, and Councilor, you and I have talked about this, is evaluating some of this work. And so, is this having the impact that we want it to have? We want to continue to commit. We are committed to that promise, and I would also say that we're not there yet. And so that is what I'm focusing our team's efforts on right now, so we can target other departments who are doing the incredible work out in the residents that we serve. So that I know you're asking for like what are specific line item, and I will come to you with those, but we're spending time with that now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I guess now from on the outside, because this work, so much of it is really also the impact that we're making in community. And I'm curious about kind of what your journey has been, or how do you envision it moving forward in terms of community input, data collection, like how are you going to measure that utilizing some of the community engagement tools and thought leaders in the city?
So because of all the different programs and the different portfolios in our departments, we are also spending time selecting 1 or 2 programs or specific services that our departments offer. Take, for example, Immigrants Lead Boston, right? That is a unique program in Moya. And we've developed an evaluation toolkit that will require direct input from participants, from focus groups, surveys, et cetera, to inform how to improve those processes, and also get us some data to the question of, is this serving the need that we want to see? So that's more like an in-house equity cabinet, really taking seriously the concept of evaluation, because A, we want to model for our colleagues what we want them and need them to do as well, but B, because there aren't also, while we are not reinventing the wheel, we are making sure that we're following Boston's context. And at no point are we expecting our staff to do things without community input. We have advisory board meetings, we have commission meetings, et cetera.
Yeah, I know I saw Councilor Coletta Zapata coming back on, and I just will end with my, I'm not gonna ask another question. I just wanna just note this in terms of just the overall work. I think especially in this moment when so many of the issues that we're trying to move forward, all of these communities are under attack, right? We're going to be under the microscope. And so the more that we can be super intentional about setting up your cabinet for success in terms of how we hold ourselves accountable, because everyone's looking for more accountability and transparency, I think that the data collection and then sharing that information is going to be helpful. So when we get into the working sessions and kind of like solidifying this a little bit further, we can get deeper into the weeds of kind of like the language. So, but for now, I do appreciate you being here, and thank you to the panelists as well. Thank you, Councilor Rorell, for your leadership in this space.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome back, Chief Solis Savera. I did have questions specifically around how the department, and I'm just prior to me saying this, I wanted to, I appreciate Councilor Mejia saying, talking about the working session process, because I felt like, our other colleague prior was, Councilor Fitzgerald was getting a little bit into like the technicalities of all of the, having this thing having teeth. So I would say, have faith in the working session process, and hopefully we get into the weeds of that. So thank you, Councilor Mejia, for pointing that out. As far as the department goes, or your cabinet goes, Chief, I feel that there's a lot under your belt in terms of like the different departments and the things that, the day-to-day operations and then implementation of programming or events or different efforts that you have going on. And as you know, I've been like following closely in terms of equity, being the chair of civil rights, and trying to, pay attention closely to how we're doing that, or as Councilman Mejia mentioned, how we're holding ourselves accountable, and developing metrics for ourselves in terms of like how are our own policies meeting the needs in our district or citywide. and with that in mind, I know that we had conversations where you've mentioned that, you know, you've hired a policy person and you were thinking about along the lines of metrics, but haven't really gotten there yet. And a lot of the frustration, I think, for yourself and for us is that, you know, how do we know that we're effective if we don't have this? And back to my original point, and then I think Councillor Worrell reemphasized the consolidation of information and how we are collecting data. It sounds to me like there is conversations happening on some level, but it didn't really answer the question about actually collecting information to be able to say, you know, this is, we know that we've collected information, you know, studies on, for example, health outcomes or economic mobility or educational attainment. And we know that we are, and these are the numbers, and we've been able to aggregate or disaggregate, aggregate and disaggregate information to a point where we understand how far, like where, like, you know, how far we have to go or where, or what the approaches are. It's one thing to be able to say this is the problem in numbers, but the approach obviously multifaceted. So, you know, just overall, if you were to say, like, I've thought about this issue in terms of, you know, measuring or implementing metrics so that we can understand whether or not we are meeting needs in terms of equity in our city. And I've also thought about in terms of implementation from policy to budget to looking at programmatic solutions and figuring out then, you know, at least what are your studies, what are your collaborations with universities, if any, what are your, in terms of next steps. And I know that there's the reparations task force and, you know, there's some issues there. And then there's also in terms of like Office of Immigrant Advancement and their robust list of like services and programmatic stuff that they provide. So I think it's a lot for you particularly. So I'm wondering, like, have you thought about this? How far have you gotten so far? And then what are you thinking in terms of like third-party agencies coming in to be able to provide all of this, you know, collecting of data, consolidating and looking at numbers and figuring out policy solutions or budget recommendations to address the needs?
Thank you, Councillor. And couldn't do this job without the incredible staff and residents and you all. So I appreciate you always being so graceful with your words here. I think an immediate next step for me is I'm going to ask that our team create a list for you of all the different ways in which we are formally gathering information. And I will also say what was stated earlier. We are particularly careful around what data and for what purposes at the moment. So I just want to name it for the record, like this is something that we're hyper aware of right now. While we want and need community input, we want to evaluate our work, we also need to be more responsible and you heard Santi, Chief Garces talk about our experience with the gender awareness guidelines and disabilities, et cetera. So just want to name that. I think, yes, and we have discussed the opportunity of bringing in a third party to help us with this. I will also say that our teams are, that is not our preference because our teams are connecting with residents and giving the information that they need to. They were hired as experts and as people that can connect with the different experts on the ground out in the community to give us the information that we need in order for us to make best decisions. And, which is part of the coalition building, when we misstep, these are groups of people that also come and tell us when we misstep. And that is when, right, we have sort of the cycle of information that is never linear, where then my job as the chief is to come and like speak when I need to speak in the different policy rooms and the different programmatic rooms and the different service groups. And so there's a lot of negotiating on a day-to-day basis, but I am more than happy to send you all a list of the different ways in which we do evaluate and we do collect information. But it's a bit of an interesting time.
Thank you. When you say when we misstep, these are the people, do you mean the community people that you're working with, or the community people?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so we talked about dashboards before, right? Like, if we've thought about this in a holistic sense, I would look at some sort of action plan for your entire cabinet. I would say there is a comprehensive way that we're looking at this, and we are looking at each section of this cabinet in terms of, and then we're also looking at pieces that are missing, because equity is not just the departments you have. Not to add another department or anything like that, but I know there's pieces missing, right? And then where are we meeting the moment? And is each department creating a metric, or and then will this all live in a dashboard someplace? And if you're not a fan of third party, in terms of your comment about people being experts, I think that they are. I think that you have an amazing head of departments, and I wonder though if we are adding like administrative burden, like in terms of like work to departments that we don't need to be, and I wonder that if it's this holistic consolidation of community, city departments, and academia, and maybe more, then would it take a third party to be able to coordinate all of that? And that's not to question the ability of your department heads, but rather saying this is an added task and a huge one. So I do find that if we go into the working session, I'd be probably looking forward to, find a way to embed that in here, where we are contracting out, because it is a lot to do, even for our own central staff.
Yeah. I think, and this may sound a bit, I hope it's not controversial. We've had this conversation individually and even in hearings, but the work of the reparations task force is also meant to help us build some of those benchmarks. What did the city do? What did the city allow to happen? What are things that we can and should commit to repairing, and what are things that we commit to never doing again? To me, that should inform also the agenda of the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet in the near future. I would want to sort of remain loyal to that process, and I know that it has not been the greatest, most perfect process, but it's a process that is back on track and will give us some very essential information. And we believe that if we target this specific issue, we can get to everyone. But I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. May I close, Madam Chair? Please. Thank you. So in thinking about reparations, in reference to like how this is a multifaceted, how racial equity in itself is a multifaceted issue. You think about, reparations and its recommendations that it's going to come, and possibly in the end, how community decided on in terms of like priority or level, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but the population that it's going to impact. Then you think about the immigrants that are also impacted by systemic racism. Then you think about, other marginalized communities that are also impacted by these different systemic oppression. In us being very careful and making sure that we're not broadening it so much with a brush that we dilute the conversation about specifically those that are most impacted, right? Black and brown, or Native, like Black people, African Americans, and all that stuff. So I think that it's so multifaceted that we have to be very careful about saying reparations is the solution, or that it will cover like the broad, spectrum of people. And also like there's this other level of research that I think needs to happen about, bureaucratic processes, red tapes, technicalities, and the different level of like systemic oppressive issues that we have in the city of Boston, specifically with like, you know, fair wages and all this other stuff, right? Like, so I think reparations lives in its own category. And then there's this other stuff, you know, in terms of bureaucratic red tapes. And then there's this other stuff about access and teaching people how to properly navigate resources so that they can actually be able to advocate and utilize those resources. So there's all of these different types, all these different levels that I think, I don't think we can say, you know, yes, let's stay true to a process, but reparations is just one part of it, a very small part of it. Maybe, I don't know, I don't want to equate it to anything, but it's just one part of it. So I want to keep us, you know, with a broad, like keep this conversation open to saying, look, there are different levels of this. One hearing is not going to do it. I'm looking forward to Councilor Worrell refiling this very soon if the working session is not happening before the end of the year and we don't get through it. Because today we only touched the tip of the iceberg. And it is super important, and to Councilor Fitzgerald's point, so crucial that we mustn't rush this process. I thank you, Madam Chair and Chief Severo.
Thank you. Not seeing Councillor Flynn on, or Councillor Louis-Jean. Okay, I think also Fitzgerald, Murphy, and Weber have.
Speak for yourself, Chair.
Sorry, Councilor Weber.
It's okay. I speak softly, I guess, but I guess for Mary Angeli or anyone else, as we're thinking about this, I mean, how do we have reports that are going to be helpful on things that are not on their face, you know, going to affect, sort of impact equity, like that we would even like to have an intent. Like, for example, if we have something on safe school zones, you know, like would an equity report be issued on that? And I guess you could make an argument on almost anything, but or even like an elected school committee where maybe there's a debate on who decides the debate, and how do you imagine that process working on, if we're filling potholes? I have no idea. You know, there's a pothole ordinance. You know, would there be a report on that? Does it have to trigger some threshold to have a report? I don't know how to think about it. I guess that's for Chief, yeah.
I'm understanding your question. I think this is part of the sponsors and the working groups to answer a bit. The way on the city side that we are engaging in some of this, no, we don't produce reports per program or per policy. And we can talk more about why in sessions. However, we have started creating interventions even in like the budget process, so that not only folks are thinking about it, they are going beyond a check in the box, and they're also coming to us for a direct consulting service. Right, like we're setting interventions to make the work pause, so that the right questions are asked, but we're not developing reports, if I'm hearing you correctly. But I do think, to your question, that's more of the sponsors would have to talk this through a little bit, because that is not currently what we do.
Okay. I guess, yeah, that was all. I mean, if we're considering this, we're refiling next year, I think I'll have a lot more questions, but I think we've been at this a while. I want to just yield my time to the filers if they have anything else.
Thank you, Council Weber. I will circle back to Council Worrell. I believe he had additional questions, and then anybody else that has additional questions at this point, feel free to raise your hand. But I will start with Council Worrell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to my council colleagues for all their great questions and remarks. Also, Chief Solis, thank you for all your work that you've been doing in this space, especially with all the new initiatives that you have rolled out. One of the new initiatives is the equity ambassadors. Can you describe to me, because my understanding is, can you just go more in depth on what the equity ambassador does, and then what are some of the differences from the equity ambassador of the director? Because if the director is also working with a different cabinet, and having the conversation, like, how do they kind of stay on the same page and not duplicate work or step on each other's toes?
The short answer to your question is, through the academy, which we've now provided this learning experience. We're trying to stay away from the concept of training, but learning experience for 120 members of the staff of all levels, from managers, directors, to program managers, to et cetera, from more than 24 departments. That was very intentional on purpose, because we wanted to hear exactly, we can say what we want about equity, and we can make the requests that we want about equity, but at the end of the day, on the day-to-day operations, how are things happening? It's really the data that I need to make decisions. And one thing that we heard loud and clear is, this group of people have so much data in their hands from their day-to-day interactions with staff, with residents and other staff. And so this concept of the E&I ambassador is not a new position. It's not a paid position. It is simply people that graduated from the curriculum that will now be meeting on a consistent basis, share best practices, troubleshoot problems of the bureaucracy, as somebody named earlier, that we need to address when they get in the way of our progress. That is very separate from the E&I manager network, which is a paid position that lives in the specific cabinets already, housing and human services. Those people are specifically there to build trust and relationships in those cabinets and do the assessments needed, build out the plans that are needed, and the implementation plans needed. They are a one-person team, but they have the entire E&I cabinet made up of 75 staff members, right, of different areas of expertise, et cetera. And so we're managing. By the way, they all talk to each other. The ambassadors will be talking to the E&I network managers, et cetera. So it is confusing, and we'll do a better job of explaining it. This is a little bit newer, since that was a direct ask of participants in the academy. So.
Got it. And then how does the ED of each department work with the E&I ambassador and the E&I manager? Because then there's the ED of BMA, then there's the ED of immigrant advancement. Then how do they all work together? Because then they are also having, my understanding is, conversations with different chiefs and cabinets to do initiatives within each of those departments.
Yep. The ambassadors, the unpaid positions, the ones that just graduated, those are already in direct contact with our departments, because those departments have either presented themselves in the academy or have participated in the academy. So the relationships have already been established. What we launched in January with these ambassadors, sort of the consistent meetings, they will be a part of that process.
Got it. And then I guess, sorry, apologies. So
no.
Are the E&I ambassadors, are they also decision makers and policy makers within? No, okay.
No, the E&I managers. Okay, we need a better graphic, y'all. I'm talking to my staff. We'll get you a better graphic. Managers are paid positions. Ambassadors are staff, our day-to-day staff that are going to give us, they're going to share information with us, so that we're working from grassroots and grass tops too. That's sort of the vision here.
Got it. Got it.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I'm a visual person as well.
Yeah, we'll get you that graphic.
I think the other thing that I wanted to just mention is, you know, we do citywide, right, training, whether it's on cybersecurity, MCAD. I know the training now on racial equity is based on the academy first come, first serve. You necessarily don't have to participate, but it is something that I do believe, right? Like anything else, right? That we find important, you know, we should all be trained on, just because of the impact that these policies have on the lives of Bostonians, especially those who have been historically marginalized. So I think that, you know, I would love to see something that's across all departments and offered to everyone and provided to everyone, similar to, you know, whether, like I said, MCAD or cybersecurity, because I think, you know, the what's at stake is, you know, we're talking about life expectancy, right? We're talking about education, right? Those are the things that we're talking about. And if, you know, we could do it for, you know, my computer breaking down, I think we could definitely do it for lives, making sure that we do the most and do everything that we can to ensure that the training, to make sure that people thrive here in Boston and increase their life expectancy, increase their ability to get the resources to have equitable, you know, literacy in our schools. I think it's important. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, all the advocates. And looking forward to diving into the working session, which will happen next year. So we're hoping to have more conversations, which I hope that all you guys will be a part of.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. Yes, confirming there will be a working session. I definitely look forward to it. Before I get into what I hope to discuss at that point, I'll go to Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, who has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just lower this. So, Chief, I guess just for my own information, can you tell me the process from your now have a policy person in your cabinet to, you know, meeting with you or, you know, coordinating with you to recommendations to the mayor? Like, what does that process look like?
There's sort of the day-to-day conversations, as you can imagine, with like your own staff. Then there's a combination of the policy advisors in each of the departments under us that report to our Deputy Director of Research and Policy. This person and I are in constant communication, and I am in constant communication with the mayor's office. That's Chief of Policy, Chief of Comms, Chief of Staff, et cetera. And that is a day-to-day, you know, dynamic. And so if I'm understanding your question, I think that's, yeah.
I think I get you. I think you're saying that you are in constant communication with your inner folks and the mayor's office policy team. Thanks. And so can you tell, I guess I should have started with your head of departments. So your head of departments are implementing work. And for example, if I'm in the immigrant advancement and I'm the director, I'm thinking about the different levels of service and in how it impacts the immigrant population in different work that I do. Within the scope of whatever, like obviously is budgeted for. But then I see the need, and then I say, well, we need a study specifically. And I know that I've been in contact with your, immigrant advancement, and I know that there's some appetite there to do a study specifically about how systemic oppression or racism impacts the immigrant population. And so when they gather their information, I think that they may move toward collaborating with the university or maybe it's a contract. When they gather the information, then they bring it to you, and is that by way of report or just verbal communication? Or has there ever been a report, like in writing, recommendations, or is it always so far meetings and verbal communications?
Meetings, verbal communications. I do my best to allow for the departments to sort of do the work that residents and other agencies need them to do, and then either there's a large need of a crisis and we need a specific expert to come into the conversation. We pool who we need to from the different departments, such as MOYA, such as LGBTQ advancement, disabilities, vice versa. If there are major red flags that our departments need more muscle on, if you will, I hate using that terminology, but I'm sort of the liaison between. The liaison's not the right word, but that's sort of the way that we manage it right now. Again, we have to be very careful because we deal with a lot of residents' sensitive information, and so we do our best to communicate to get the work done.
I hear that you have these communications or sometimes meetings or sometimes focus groups or efforts that you're putting together with community. And I guess I'm interested in looking at, like, you know, hardcore, like black and white, what are the results? What has been the response? What has been the recommendations from the community? And if you're not there yet, it's totally fine. Would love to see it in the future. Would love to see, you know, I know that there's a chief advisor, Lori Nelson, and what does her recommendations look like? And if that's in writing, would love to see that. If there are recommendations from your head of departments, would love to see those recommendations in writing as well. I think starting there, to Councilor Worrell's point, you know, it's one thing for us to come to you and say, look, Chief, we want to do this thing respectfully, and how do we work with you? And working with you looks like, hopefully that we are asking you, can you send us information where you are thus far? And I think there are reports, there are visual, to be able to understand what each department has recommended in terms of racial equity. And then moving forward, then we can say, okay, where are we and how can the council support you in this ordinance by way, like through our working session, figuring out how we implement those things. Just codifying a thing or laws, like it's kind of arduous for you to say, well, we're already doing that, or that's duplicate or whatever. But to be able to see where you are, it doesn't matter where you are because you have a lot of work to do. We need to see where you are, though, specifically, concretely on paper, so that we can understand exactly what more or what less or whatever we need to do to create the synergy between your office, council, administration, community, and again, academia. And if there are studies needed, we'll have a better understanding of what exists and how far we need to go. And I want you to know that I'm not doing this. I stopped myself from asking questions about equity for a while because I said, what are you doing, Tanya, Councilor Anderson, to do what you're asking of her, asking of equity department, not just you. So I do have a couple of studies one with BU and one with Northeastern, to be able to look at metrics to address our district's action plan in terms of the whole, addressing each domain, right? Housing, education, economic development, public health, and public safety, and so forth. There are 7 of them. And then building out the metrics and implementing rubrics that I will know where the benchmarks are and how far I need to go and what policies to focus on and what are the budget needs of my district or what are the project needs of my district. And so I want you to know that I'm looking at this and I don't want to be hypocritically asking you for something that I'm not already doing. But I don't think it matters how far you've gotten because you are super, super busy. I want to understand exactly what the information is so that when we go into this working session, we're not duplicating efforts and that we're working with you and not just giving you something to implement.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, list of recommendations to improve life outcomes for residents is something that we think about, we write about, we talk about all the time. If that is what I'm being asked for, that would be incredibly helpful to share with you all. Absolutely, we have that, we use that, and that has been informed by residents, that has been informed by research, that has been informed, and we use that to communicate with other departments. That is a very clear ask that I can definitely make happen.
Oh, that's fantastic. I do think, again, that this is multifaceted. And Madam Chair, I'm going to close here, and thank you for indulging me. I do think it's multifaceted, right? So, like, you know, we're talking about like duties and responsibilities and figuring out there, and we can't necessarily tell you how to execute your job, but rather we can implement laws that says that by certain protocols it has to be done. And then there's, you know, in terms of the specific protocols for advancing equity, it has to touch a certain domains, right? Like your health outcomes or economic mobility, educational attainment, housing and so forth, and all the other like social determinants of health. And then there's the investment part of it, that in terms of like collaborations or partnerships with community agencies that are already doing that. But then there's this monitoring and evaluation piece that we've talked about. So it's the dashboard, it's the consolidation of studies, it's the partnerships and looking at how to bring all of this together. And this is why I keep saying like the implementation or enforcement has to begin with a third-party agency that makes those recommendations, that is able to do all of that administrative tasks, because it's a huge undertaking on top of your job running a cabinet. And I do believe that in the working session, I'm going to be interested in like making sure that we are realistic in looking at, one, yes, it will have teeth. Two, to make sure that it's fair and that we are not asking you to take another load or another job on top of a thing, but rather that you become a partner and not the person solely responsible for implementation. Thank you very much for this conversation. Looking forward to the next working session. Thank you, lead sponsor and Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the panelists who are still here with us and your contributions. I really appreciated listening to your expertise.
Likewise, this has been an incredibly informative discussion, and I appreciate all the robust questions and answers from my colleagues and the panelists, respectively. I think at this point, I will just flag maybe a few things for the working session that I want to put on record, just to have folks to start thinking about it and things that I want to focus in on. So I've definitely heard about enforcement, how this will have teeth on the city council side. Procedurally, when somebody files an ordinance, a home rule, or zoning amendment, whatever it is, and it goes through the Government Operations Committee, in the event, even before that, when it is filed, and say, for example, it doesn't include it, is the clerk then required to refuse it? Does it go on the agenda? And if it does go on the agenda, is it up to the city council president then? I know that there are a lot of things that occur in the city of Boston that require urgent action. So, for example, the thing that comes to mind is the need to bring in the Boston Elections Department to discuss what happened in November during the presidential election. And so in that instance, I think there were 3 different colleagues that produced a docket to have a hearing on it. In the event that it's an ordinance or home rule petition, I don't want to limit councilors' abilities to produce something if they are able to. If they are very adaptable and their staffs are able to move quickly, they should be able to produce an ordinance without an equity analysis in the preamble. And so maybe allowing for a grace period of up to X amount of weeks, or I wouldn't even say a month, or months, but maybe it is 4 weeks. And we can talk about that, and the creation of the Council Equity Task Force, I think, is incredibly important. Before I get to that, I do just want to call out that, the enforcement mechanism, separate from the legislative part, is the budget amendment. So this requires equity in budgeting. So it mandates an equity-focused evaluation, I think is what you say, or have in here, Council Worrell, in annual budgets, and then also in some of our budget amendments. And so at what point does one councilor's, and we've already seen it, at what point does one councilor's budget amendment in terms of allocations and polls, is that in conflict with another councilor's? And what does that mean when we have varying definitions of equity and how we achieve it, especially as we're talking about the capital budget? I know that we only have a yes or no vote on that, but if we are trying to push something forward through the operating budget, what does that look like, and how are we rectifying that? So that's something I want to discuss further. I think the general definition of equity, coming up with that, Councilor Worrell and his team, in partnership with many others, have developed a task force that provides representation from individual offices. And we hire a director of the CECO, which is the Council Central Staff Committee on Equity. And so this individual has a lot of power, can help set the agenda, or set the definition rather of what equity is. I think, again, it comes down to various councilors and the fact that we are a body of 13 with our own districts, and we may have varying definitions of what equity is. And so I'm happy that we might have the opportunity to have this representative body within our body. I think that there is an opportunity, thinking about Councilor Fernandez-Anderson's point of having a third party organization come in and help with some of the work, the equity assessments. I think we could also look to potentially having a third party contractor to come in. I'm specifically thinking, and we'll call out the YWCA to be the neutral third party that helps us with this work, or at least provides us multiple definitions that we then agree to. So there's a bunch of different things that we have to talk about. I think the last thing that I will say is ensuring that central staff is for the council side, ensuring that central staff remains the neutral third party it's supposed to be in their role in assisting councilors. Under this ordinance, they are there to help us with our equity assessments. So gathering data, research, even developing the assessment similar to the way that they do for committee reports or briefs or whatever. I want to make sure that that person's capacity is expanded, that they have everything that they need if it's not contracted out to a third party. But then also that they are not going to be put in a difficult position where they have to be the final decision makers about who, in the event that there is conflict, whose definition of equity is right or wrong. So I've already spoken to Councilor Worrell about these things. I'm very grateful that he's open-minded to it. He's also he feels very strongly about this ordinance, as he should. It is very strong. I think that there are so many aspects of this ordinance that it doesn't need any work. I do think that there are some points that I just mentioned, in addition to some other smaller things, like do we need to publicly notice the committee, the CECO, all of that. So those are just my initial thoughts. I do look forward to the working session. Kathy, I do see your hand up. I welcome any feedback, thoughts, comments.
Just on the thorny topic of definitions, which can be endless. But if there is any interest in like what is the sort of what's been adopted nationally in most places, I'm happy to share that as well, which is very much focused on outcomes, right? And not just inputs.
Thank you. I welcome that. I would love to, if you have anything that you'd like to submit, please feel free to send to the sponsor or my office, and we'll be sure to share it widely with the councilors, everybody who was here today, but then also folks who couldn't make it. Great. We do have folks, I think, still on for public testimony, so I will transition to that. I will look to central staff to elevate the following individuals if they are still on the call. We have Shauna Weaver, Oh, excuse me. So I'm getting the note she had to leave, but there is a written statement in the folder that's available to all of my colleagues. If we have Lori Radwin or Kadrian Turner on the line, we'll start with Lori, who I believe has just been promoted to panelist. Lori, if you want to say your name and your affiliation, you have 2 minutes of public testimony. Thank you so much for your patience.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Lori Radwin. I live in Roslindale. Some on the call know that I spent a good deal of my career studying and working to improve healthcare inequities. And in my field, nurses and doctors would be genuinely astounded when presented with the data that suggested they were not delivering equal care to everyone. In contrast, I found less astonishment when city departments are asked to examine the data that suggests inequities in city services. What seems so clear from the data patterns seems not to be taken seriously. And I know councilors have listened to me as I described how parking restrictions in Roslindale Square seem to disfavor owners who are immigrants, Latino, Latina, Black, and Asian, and how the planning department is engaged in Squares and Streets, a group that is 82% white, and yet this skewed group's input will rezone blocks that are less than 20% white, and how the planning department has fielded and collected their high-stakes survey that did not even collect demographic data, let alone stratify it to examine equity. One of the issues, and I've brought this up repeatedly at budget hearings, is there seems to be no baseline data to be found in these cases. For example, it floors me that our main streets and small business departments do not have baseline data that could be used to examine disproportion in a rigorous way. And so I am truly grateful to see this RISE ordinance. And I want to tell you how much I've enjoyed this hearing, by the way, because I hope this ordinance will give us the tools to truly ameliorate the inequities in our systems. Thank you for accepting my testimony.
Thank you, Lori. We'll now go to Kadrian. I apologize if I said your name wrong, Turner. Please state your name and your affiliation. You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the hearing today. It was, I'm excited to be able to listen for the past almost 3 hours, just to see what the city is doing to improve inequities in the city. I'd like to talk about 2 things. One, workplace bullying. I was subjected to workplace mobbing at Northeastern University. I worked there for 10.5 years. I spoke up about a $20,000 salary disparity, and I spoke up for about 5 years, and nothing was done, so I filed a grievance, and that's when the retaliation and the hostile work environment and everything took place. Ultimately, it became necessary for me to file 16 grievances with the city, with the state, with the federal government. Also, my case went to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. I almost committed suicide because it was so bad. I worked in the sponsor research division at Northeastern University, and I filed a grievance against approximately 36 individuals. Most of those individuals were not Boston residents. Many of them commuted from other cities, other states, and immigrated from other countries. And so these are issues that we definitely need to address. This issue spiraled through my family. My husband, who is now deceased, our marriage was suffered. My husband was also discriminated at work before he passed away. He passed away as a result of an opioid and alcohol overdose. This issue spiraled through my children, who were also at Northeastern University pursuing their college education, and it reached a point where we had to figure out how to pay $40,000, $50,000 for them to continue their education. And so this is definitely an issue that I haven't heard much talk about. I've been seeking justice for the past 23 years. And we, as workforce members, we definitely need equitable legal representation. And one of the suggestions that I make is that we establish a one-stop legal aid center, maybe with the Career Center that's already established, to provide workers with the same legal representation that a Northeastern University or a Harvard University has. Otherwise, we're no competition for those entities. Also, I would like to speak about, I live on Vesta Road, and we've had nine block parties to improve the street. When I first moved here, I've been living here for 30 years. There were gunshots, there were constantly fights. The building across the street, 820 through 828 Blue Hill Ave has been a problem property. I have been calling, neighbors have been calling regarding the dumpsters, regarding the rats, regarding the bug infested and molded mattresses that have been out there for at least a year. And this is something that's really frustrating. We all have our own issues to deal with personally, and we shouldn't find ourselves constantly calling the city of Boston regarding this property across the street. And one of the things that I'm also disturbed about is this year we had our 9th block party. Not one city councilor showed up, not one. And I find that to be a problem considering all the work that we put into this. And where Vesta Road used to be a hotspot. As I mentioned, the police were constantly here. I mean, it was just drugs, you name it. I don't know, we still have work to do, but we've come a long way, and we definitely need the support of the city. We shouldn't have to constantly call our city councilors. We shouldn't have to call the police to that degree. We need buy-in from the city to support us as we do the work to improve Vesta Road. Also, I have a list of names. Since I worked at the Sponsored Research Division at Northeastern University during the course of this hearing, some names came to my mind, but I will submit those names with my written testimony. If someone could inform me how much time I have to prepare the written testimony, that would be helpful.
So you can send into the city council email at any time. It's ccc.go@boston.gov.
Okay, so I don't have a week. Is it 2 days or how long?
It's as long as you need. It's an open email.
Okay, so we definitely need support from our city councils and the mayor and everyone, just to be on board. And if we could also collaborate with the state, with the federal government, because, our government has an obligation to take care of the constituents. And I just thank you for hearing me, and have a good night.
Thank you so much, Cardrian, for joining us. I apologize that you're going through this. Everyone deserves to work in an environment where you're treated with dignity and respect. So we appreciate you letting us know about this. And if you can follow up in the email that you send, the address that you mentioned, and various other points of information that you'd like to make sure gets to your respective counselor and your at-larges. Do we have any other public testimony signups? I'm asking central staff.
No more.
Okay, I think I will pass it to the panelists. Actually, I neglected to do this. If they have any closing remarks that they'd like to say, and then I'll pass it to my colleagues. Please feel free to unmute yourself at this time if you want to provide any closing thoughts. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. Thank you so much for being here and providing your invaluable expertise. We so appreciate it. Okay, let's go to Councillor Worrell.
Thank you again to the advocates, to everyone who played a part and will continue to play a part, not only in establishing or making equity or embed equity more ingrained in our local politics and our decision-making processes, not only here in Boston, but throughout the country. I just want to thank you for joining us on this journey, and I'm looking forward to what more can we do, what more data can we collect because as we know, I think what is going to be the foundation that we stand on, or be our legal defense, is going to be the data. It's going to be that data, and I think we need to make sure that we have it when and if they do come. So I'm looking forward to strengthening this ordinance in upcoming working sessions, but also just encouraged that so many people are here speaking in support of the ordinance. Also just want to let Cardina know that I was at the Vesta Road block party. I must have missed you, but I was definitely there, and I did take a picture of I just went through my note, took a picture of a dumpster that was overflowing on 828 Blue Hill Ave, that we have to make sure that we stay on top of it. But just wanted to say thank you again, and I'm encouraged and look forward to on this work. Thank you.
Great. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'll just piggyback off of Councilor Laurel. Cardine, I wasn't there, but it's not my district. I did send my staff to attend because it's not my district, but I would have loved to go if I had the time. I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for prefacing our next working session, and in terms of your recommendations. I would like to see them as well as a co-sponsor, if that's okay with you, just so that I can sort of like check off some of my recommendations and not be repetitive. And if that's okay with you, I think you're frozen, Madam Chair, but and Councilor Laurel, thank you so much for adding me on to this, and I look forward to the conversation. I think when Ms. Cardine was talking, I kept thinking about Councilor Weber, and don't want to like sort of volunteer you into this conversation, but a lot of what Ms. Turner was expressing here does spark I think an interest in a possible conversation in the future in terms of your budget amendment, Council Weber, for legal services or aid in housing, but also like now looking into like workforce and workers' rights, considering, and I'll let you speak to your experience, but really do appreciate you being here and the work that you've done in your career to support folks in terms of civil rights in the workplace. But I thank you, and I look forward to more conversation. And Madam Chair, if you're back with us, I would love to hear your recommendations again, so that I can consolidate it with mine. Thank you.
Central staff. Okay, I saw that they promoted iPhone, which I believe is Councilor Coletta.
That's me. I literally just jumped on. I'm so sorry. I got as far as let's compare notes. And would love to hear anything else that you had mentioned, Councilor Fernandez-Anderson.
Oh, the rest was just bringing in Councilor Weber's experience with workforce, workers' rights, and stuff like that. And I didn't know how to specifically like talk on it, so I was inviting him to talk about that if he was interested, and just saying that I was looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I would love to have this be a collaborative process and really look forward to these conversations with my colleagues. I don't have anything, just gratitude, and just say thanks again to the panelists. I appreciate your work, and thank you to the makers for this very thorough ordinance. And I do look forward to these conversations. It is our goal in the new year to have a working session expeditiously. And so we'll work with the lead sponsors to do that, and then in the interim having conversations to make this the strongest ordinance that we can that can advance racial equity in our city. So with that, I will go ahead and say that this...
I don't know if you can see me. My camera's
Oh,
off.
I'm so sorry, Councilor Mejia.
No,
I apologize. Thank you so much.
No,
go ahead.
I don't know, my computer just got discombobulated here, but I wanted to just offer a few, I really do appreciate the public testimony. I think that the more that we can lean into those who we're representing, as we continue to have these conversations, I think the better that this piece of legislation will be. So I welcome the feedback and I appreciate it. And I just want to say thank you to Councilor Morel for being the data man here, always making sure that we're holding all of ourselves accountable to that return on investment. So thank you, and I look forward to the collaborative work.
Great, thank you so much. In fairness, Councilor Weber's still on. Councilor Weber, do you have any final thoughts? Sorry.
No, I'm happy to just take a compliment and appreciate the filers, and I look forward to working on it. And I thank the panelists for helping give us, some added direction. And I'm going to take their words to heart and look forward to working on this in the new year.
Very well. Great. Thank you, everybody. This hearing on docket 1200 is adjourned. Appreciate you all. Thank you, Central Staff.